Before the world began, before the gods walked among the 9 realms, before light distinguished itself from darkness, there existed only Ginnungagap, the yawning void that stretched endlessly in all directions. This primordial chasm held neither substance nor form, neither warmth nor cold, but served as the cosmic womb from which all existence would emerge. To the north of this great emptiness lay Niflheim, a realm of perpetual mist and bitter frost, where 11 rivers called Elevaga flowed with waters so ancient they had no beginning. To the south burned Muspelheim, a domain of searing flames and molten rock, guarded by the fire giant Surtur, whose flaming sword would one day consume the world. The meeting of these opposing forces within Ginnungagap created the first stirrings of life. As the icy vapours from Niflheim drifted southward into the void, they encountered the scorching heat radiating from Muspelheim. Where fire met ice, the frozen mists began to thaw, and from these primordial droplets emerged Ymir, the first of all giants. His awakening marked the beginning of consciousness in the cosmos, though this consciousness bore no resemblance to the ordered thought that would later characterize gods and men. Ymir possessed a form that defied easy description, being neither fully solid nor entirely ethereal. His massive frame stretched across vast distances, and his body temperature fluctuated between the extremes that had birthed him. Unlike the gods who would later emerge with their structured hierarchies and defined roles, Ymir existed as pure, undirected force, creation and destruction intertwined in a single being. His very breath altered the temperature of Ginnungagap, while his movements sent tremors through the nascent reality forming around him. As Ymir slept in those earliest moments of existence, his body began producing life through processes that operated beyond any natural law that would later govern the world. From beneath his left arm, where the heat of his body created pools of perspiration, emerged the first giant-born beings. These entities possessed neither names initially bestowed upon them, nor clear individual identities, but they carried within them the same chaotic essence that defined their progenitor. Between Ymir's legs, additional giants formed from his sweat, each one embodying different aspects of the primordial forces that had created their ancestor. The significance of these spontaneous births cannot be overstated, for they establish the fundamental nature of Giantkind as beings of organic chaos, capable of self-generation and multiplication without the need for conventional procreation. Unlike the later gods who would require careful planning and deliberate action to create new life, the giants proliferated through the sheer abundance of Ymir's vital essence. This difference would prove crucial in defining the eternal conflict between the ordered cosmos the gods sought to establish and the wild, untamed forces the giants represented. While Ymir and his offspring populated the void, another creature emerged from the melting ice of Ginnungagap. Audumbla, the primordial cow, appeared to nourish the first giant with her milk, which flowed in 4 rivers from her udder. This cosmic bovine sustained Ymir's massive form while simultaneously working to free another entity from the ice. By licking the salty ice blocks with her rough tongue, Audumbla gradually revealed Buri, the first of the Aesir lineage and grandfather to Odin. This parallel emergence of giant and god ancestor within the same cosmic moment established the intertwined destinies of these two races. The giants that emerged from Ymir's body possessed characteristics that reflected their chaotic origins. Some towered to immense heights, their heads lost among the forming clouds, while others compressed their substantial bulk into more manageable forms. Their appearances varied wildly. Some bore multiple heads or limbs, others shifted between different shapes, and many displayed features that combined elements from various creatures that did not yet exist. These physical manifestations reflected their essential nature as beings of pure possibility, unbound by the limitations that would later define more structured forms of life. As generations passed within the timeless expanse of Ginnungagap, the giant population grew exponentially. Ymir's descendants developed their own methods of reproduction, though these remained fundamentally different from the processes that would later govern other races. Giants could emerge from stone, ice, or storm clouds, born from the intersection of elemental forces rather than through conventional parentage. Some sprang fully formed from mountain peaks, while others coalesced from ocean foam or crystallized from winter winds. The relationship between Ymir and his descendants was not one of traditional familial hierarchy. The primordial giant served more as a source of endless vitality than as a governing patriarch. His massive form provided both the physical space and the life force necessary for his offspring to thrive, while his unconscious will shaped the basic parameters of their existence. The giants recognized his supremacy not through conscious deference, but through their fundamental dependence on his continued presence in the cosmic order. During this primordial age, the giants developed their own crude civilization within and around Ymir's body. They carved dwellings from ice formations, built structures from compressed mist, and established territories based on the various regions of their ancestors' massive form. These early settlements bore no resemblance to the organized cities that gods and men would later construct, instead following organic patterns that reflected the chaotic nature of their inhabitants. The giant society operated without formal laws or structured governance, instead functioning through a complex web of power relationships based on individual strength and elemental affinity. Those giants with stronger connections to ice commanded respect in the colder regions of Ymir's body, while those aligned with fire held sway in areas where Muspelheim's influence remained strong. This natural hierarchy created a dynamic but unstable social order that would persist throughout Giantkind's existence. As the cosmic situation evolved, tensions began to emerge between the growing populations of giants and the descendants of Buri. The gods, led by Odin and his brothers Vili and Ve, viewed the chaotic proliferation of Giantkind as a threat to their vision of an ordered cosmos. The giants, for their part, saw no need for the structured reality the gods proposed, preferring the wild freedom of their primordial existence. The conflict that would define the relationship between gods and giants had its roots in these fundamental philosophical differences. The gods sought to impose pattern and meaning on the raw forces of creation, while the giants embodied those forces in their purest, most untamed form. This opposition was not merely political or territorial, but represented competing visions of what existence itself should become. The growing tension reached its culmination when Odin, Vili and Ve made their fateful decision to slay Ymir. The three brothers recognized that their ordered cosmos could never emerge while the primordial giant continued to generate endless chaos through his very existence. The killing of Ymir would prove to be the single most significant act in the early history of the cosmos, fundamentally altering the nature of reality and establishing the gods' dominion over the structured world they sought to create. When the brothers struck down Ymir, his death throes shook the foundations of Ginnungagap. His massive body, which had served as both landscape and life source for countless giants, began to transform into the raw materials for a new kind of world. The blood that flowed from his wounds created vast floods that swept away most of the giant population, drowning them in the very essence that had once sustained them. Only a few giants managed to escape this deluge, among them Bergelmir and his wife, who fled in a makeshift vessel crafted from a hollowed tree trunk. The cosmic significance of Ymir's death extended far beyond the immediate destruction it caused. His flesh became the soil of Midgard, the world of men, while his bones formed the mountains that would define the landscape for ages to come. His blood filled the oceans and lakes, his skull became the dome of the sky, and his brain was scattered to form the clouds. Even his eyebrows found purpose, becoming the protective barrier that would separate Midgard from the wilder realms beyond. This transformation of Ymir's corpse into the foundation of ordered reality represented the gods' ultimate victory over primordial chaos. By using the giants' own substance to create their structured cosmos, Odin and his brothers demonstrated their ability to impose meaning and purpose on even the most chaotic forces. The irony was not lost on the surviving giants, who found themselves living in a world literally built from their ancestors' remains. Bergelmir's survival proved crucial for the continuation of Giantkind. As one of the few to escape the flood of Ymir's blood, he became the progenitor of all subsequent giant generations. His lineage would carry forward the essential characteristics of their primordial ancestors, while adapting to the new reality the gods had created. The giants who descended from Bergelmir retained their chaotic nature and their opposition to divine order, but they were forced to operate within the constraints of the structured cosmos that now surrounded them. The establishment of this new world order marked the end of the Primordial Age and the beginning of the complex relationship between gods and giants that would define Norse cosmology. The giants, no longer able to proliferate with the wild abandon of the earliest times, became more focused in their opposition to divine rule. They developed more sophisticated strategies and formed more organised alliances, while never abandoning their fundamental nature as agents of chaos and change. The survival of Bergelmir and his wife established more than just the continuation of Giantkind. It marked the beginning of their territorial consolidation into what would become known as Jotunheim, the realm of giants. As the cosmic dust settled from Ymir's transformation into the foundation of the ordered world, the surviving giants found themselves displaced from their original domain within their ancestors' body. They required a new homeland, one that could accommodate their chaotic nature while existing within the structured cosmos the gods had imposed upon reality. Jotunheim emerged as the designated realm for Giantkind through a combination of divine planning and natural necessity. The gods, having witnessed the destructive potential of uncontrolled giant proliferation during the Primordial Age, recognized the importance of containing these chaotic forces within defined boundaries. However, they also understood that complete elimination of Giantkind was neither possible nor desirable, as the giants represented essential aspects of natural force that the cosmos required to maintain its dynamic balance. The solution lay in geographical segregation, creating a realm where giants could exist and thrive without directly threatening the ordered domains of gods and eventually men. The positioning of Jotunheim within the cosmic structure of the Nine Worlds reflected careful consideration of both practical and symbolic factors. The realm occupied the eastern regions of the cosmic tree Yggdrasil, situated at a considerable distance from Asgard, the divine stronghold that housed the Aesir gods. This separation was not merely spatial, but represented a fundamental division between order and chaos, civilization and wilderness, structure and spontaneous force. The vast distances between these realms served as a natural buffer zone, reducing the likelihood of casual contact while still permitting the more significant interactions that cosmic balance required. The boundaries separating Jotunheim from the other realms consisted of more than simple geographical features. Ancient rivers, descendants of the primordial Elivaga that had flowed since before creation itself, formed the primary barriers between giant land and the domains of gods and men. These waterways carried within their currents the memory of the earliest times, when ice and fire first met in Ginnungagap to create life itself. The rivers served multiple functions. They acted as physical obstacles that discouraged casual travel, magical barriers that contained the chaotic energies emanating from Jotunheim, and symbolic representations of the fundamental differences between the ordered and chaotic aspects of existence. The Elivagar rivers themselves possessed characteristics that distinguished them from ordinary waterways. Their waters flowed with a consistency somewhere between liquid and ice, maintaining a temperature that fluctuated according to the proximity of giant settlements and the emotional states of powerful giant inhabitants. During periods of particular giant agitation, these rivers could freeze solid enough to support massive armies, while in times of relative peace, they flowed with such violence that even the gods approached their crossings with caution. The rivers also carried within their depths remnants of the primordial ice from which the first giants had emerged, giving them the ability to spontaneously generate new forms of life when conditions aligned properly. Beyond these aquatic boundaries, the landscape of Jotunheim itself defied easy categorization. The realm encompassed an enormous variety of terrains, each shaped by the particular characteristics of its giant inhabitants and the chaotic forces they embodied. Unlike the carefully planned and maintained environments of Asgard, or the naturally balanced ecosystems that would later characterize Midgard, Jotunheim's geography shifted and evolved according to the whims and conflicts of its residents. Mountains could appear overnight when earth giants engaged in territorial disputes, while entire forests might wither and die if fire giants established new settlements in their vicinity. The iron forests of Jarnvidr represented one of the most distinctive and dangerous regions within Jotunheim. These metallic woodlands stretched across vast areas of the realm's interior, their trees composed not of organic matter but of various iron alloys that had formed through unknown processes during the early ages of giant settlement. The iron trees grew to immense heights, their metallic bark reflecting the pale light that filtered through Jotunheim's perpetually overcast skies. The forest served as breeding grounds for the wolves that would play crucial roles in the eventual destruction of the cosmos, creatures whose size and ferocity matched the hostile environment that had shaped them. Within Jarnvidr, the normal rules governing forest ecosystems ceased to apply. The iron trees required no soil or water to sustain themselves, instead drawing energy directly from the chaotic forces that permeated Jotunheim. Their metallic leaves rang like bells when disturbed by wind, creating a constant symphony of metallic chimes that could be heard for miles across the giant realm. The sound served as both a warning system for the forest's inhabitants and a means of communication among the various creatures that made their homes among the iron branches. The wildlife of Jarnvidr reflected the unnatural characteristics of their environment. Iron-tusked boars rooted through metallic undergrowth, their bodies adapted to digest the mineral-rich vegetation that grew in the shadow of the metal trees. Ravens with feathers that gleamed like polished steel nested in the highest branches, serving as messengers between different giant clans and occasionally carrying information to other realms. Most significantly, the forest housed the breeding grounds of Fenrir's offspring, wolves whose size exceeded that of horses and whose intelligence rivaled that of many giants themselves. The climate within Jarnvidr remained perpetually autumn-like, with metallic leaves constantly falling to create carpets of iron fragments that crunched underfoot. The temperature stayed cool enough to be comfortable for the forest inhabitants, but never dropped low enough to cause the iron trees to contract and crack. This stable environment allowed the forest to serve as a neutral meeting ground for giant clans that might otherwise engage in destructive conflicts, though the peace maintained within Jarnvidr was always tenuous and subject to sudden disruption. Moving beyond the iron forests, the northern regions of Jotunheim transformed into frozen wastes that challenged even giant endurance. These Arctic territories housed the most dangerous and unpredictable members of Giantkind, beings whose exposure to extreme cold had fundamentally altered their nature and capabilities. The frost giants of these regions possessed abilities that surpassed those of their temperate-dwelling relatives, manipulating ice and snow with such skill that they could create entire cities from frozen water, or summon blizzards that lasted for months. The frozen wastes bore no resemblance to the ice-covered landscapes found in other realms. The ice itself possessed an unusual quality, appearing sometimes transparent as crystal and other times opaque as stone, depending on the magical influences affecting it at any given moment. Beneath the surface, ice lay layers of compressed snow that had accumulated over countless ages, creating a substrate that could support enormous structures while remaining flexible enough to shift and change, according to the needs of its giant inhabitants. Within these frozen territories, the most powerful frost giants constructed palaces and fortresses from ice so hard it rivaled stone in durability. These structures incorporated architectural principles unknown in other realms, utilising the unique properties of magically enhanced ice to create buildings that could expand or contract according to seasonal changes or the emotional states of their inhabitants. The largest of these ice palaces could house entire giant clans, with room to spare for the massive creatures that served as their guardians and companions. The central regions of Jotunheim contained the realm's most significant settlement, Utgard, the fortress city that served as the closest thing Giantkind possessed to a capital. Unlike the organic development that characterised most giant settlements, Utgard had been deliberately constructed as a demonstration of giant architectural capabilities and a symbol of their collective strength. The city's walls rose to heights that dwarfed even the largest structures in Asgard, built from stone so massive that only the strongest giants could manipulate them during construction. Utgard's design reflected the chaotic nature of its inhabitants, while still maintaining enough organisation to function as a viable urban centre. The city's streets followed no logical pattern, instead winding and branching according to the whims of the various giant clans that had contributed to its construction. Buildings varied wildly in size and style, from simple stone huts that housed lesser giants to elaborate multi-storey structures that accommodated the realm's most powerful inhabitants. The city's central plaza could hold gatherings of thousands of giants, serving as a forum for the discussions and disputes that passed for giant governance. The fortress aspect of Utgard manifested in its defensive capabilities rather than its appearance. While the city's walls appeared crude compared to the refined fortifications of other realms, they incorporated giant magic that made them nearly impregnable to conventional assault. The stones themselves had been imbued with the essence of earth giants, giving them the ability to repair damage automatically and to shift position to close gaps created by attackers. The city's gates, carved from single pieces of stone larger than most buildings, could be sealed so tightly that no force short of divine intervention could open them against the will of their giant guardians. Within Utgard's walls, giant society displayed its most organised aspects. The city housed workshops where giant craftsmen created weapons and tools sized for their massive frames, forges that burned with fires hot enough to work metals unknown in other realms, and meeting halls where the various giant clans gathered to discuss matters of mutual concern. The city also served as a repository for giant knowledge, with libraries carved directly into stone walls containing records of giant history, magical practices and accumulated wisdom stretching back to the Primordial Age. In the mountainous regions of Jotunheim stood Thrymheimer, the Hall of Skadi, the giantess who had married into the Aesir and maintained residences in both realms. Her hall represented a unique fusion of giant and divine architectural principles, combining the massive scale preferred by Giantkind with the refined aesthetics favoured by the gods. Thrymheimer served as one of the few locations where peaceful interaction between gods and giants occurred with any regularity, though even these meetings remained formal and carefully structured to prevent misunderstandings that might escalate into violence. Skadi's hall occupied a position high in the mountains, chosen to provide commanding views of the surrounding landscape while remaining accessible to visitors from both Jotunheim and Asgard. The structure itself incorporated elements from both architectural traditions, giant-sized rooms and passages combined with divine attention to decorative detail and artistic flourish. The hall's great fireplace could accommodate logs the size of entire trees, while its walls featured intricate carvings that told the stories of both giant and divine heroes. The significance of Thrymheimer extended beyond its role as a meeting place between the realms. Skadi's residence served as a symbol of the possibility for cooperation between giants and gods, demonstrating that the fundamental opposition between order and chaos need not always result in open conflict. The hall's existence provided hope for those on both sides who believed that peaceful coexistence might eventually be achieved, though such optimists remained a minority in both communities. The symbolic importance of Jotunheim as the realm of untamed nature permeated every aspect of its existence. Unlike the other 8 worlds, which had been shaped according to divine plan or natural law, Jotunheim remained fundamentally wild and unpredictable. Its landscapes changed according to the emotional states and magical activities of its inhabitants, creating an environment that reflected the chaotic essence of Giantkind itself. This wildness served as both a source of strength for the giants and a constant reminder to the other realms of what existence had been like before the imposition of the cosmic order. The realm's untamed character manifested in countless ways throughout its territories. Weather patterns followed no predictable cycles, with summer heat giving way to winter cold without warning, while storms could appear and dissipate within hours based on the moods of powerful giant weather workers. Plant and animal life evolved rapidly in response to changing conditions, producing species found nowhere else in the 9 worlds. Even the passage of time seemed different in Jotunheim, flowing faster in some regions and slower in others, according to the magical influences affecting different areas. This temporal irregularity created practical challenges for anyone attempting to navigate or understand Jotunheim from an outside perspective. Travellers from other realms often found that journeys they expected to take days might be completed in hours, while simple tasks that should require minutes could stretch into weeks. The giants themselves had adapted to these temporal fluctuations, developing internal senses that allowed them to gauge the actual passage of time regardless of external conditions. The wild nature of Jotunheim also served as a testing ground for the cosmic forces that maintain the balance between order and chaos throughout the 9 worlds. The realm's chaotic energies constantly pressed against the boundaries that separated it from other domains, probing for weaknesses that might allow chaos to spread beyond its designated territory. This pressure served as a constant reminder to the gods that their ordered cosmos remained vulnerable to disruption and required constant vigilance to maintain. The great deluge that swept away most of Giantkind when Ymir's blood flooded the primordial world left only scattered survivors to rebuild their race. Among these fortunate few, Bergelmir and his wife stood as the most significant, not merely for their survival, but for their role as the new progenitors of all subsequent giant generations. Their escape from the catastrophic flood in a makeshift vessel carved from a tree trunk marked the beginning of a new era for Giantkind, one in which they would need to establish their civilization within the structured cosmos the gods had created from their ancestors' remains. Bergelmir possessed characteristics that distinguished him from the chaotic spawn of Ymir's sweat and breath. Where the primordial giants had emerged through spontaneous generation, lacking clear individual identity or purpose, Bergelmir demonstrated the capacity for forward planning and strategic thinking that would prove essential for giant survival in the post-flood world. His decision to construct a vessel capable of weathering the deluge showed a level of foresight that his predecessors had rarely displayed, suggesting that the trauma of near extinction had sparked evolutionary changes within giant consciousness itself. The vessel that carried Bergelmir and his wife to safety became legendary among subsequent giant generations, not merely as a symbol of survival, but as evidence of giant ingenuity and adaptability. Crafted from the trunk of one of the great trees that had grown from the intersection of fire and ice in the earliest times, the boat possessed qualities that distinguished it from ordinary wood. The tree's exposure to primordial forces had imbued its timber with resistance to both extreme heat and bitter cold, allowing it to maintain structural integrity even when subjected to the violent temperature fluctuations of Ymir's blood as it transformed the cosmic landscape. The construction process itself required skills that Bergelmir had developed through necessity rather than training. Using tools fashioned from fragments of ice harder than stone, he hollowed out the massive trunk while his wife gathered provisions and materials that might prove useful during their uncertain journey. The couple worked with a desperate efficiency, aware that the rising flood of their ancestors' blood would soon make escape impossible. The collaboration during this crisis established patterns of cooperation that would influence giant family structures for generations to come. The journey through the flood tested both Bergelmir's seamanship and his wife's resourcefulness. The vessel rode waves of blood that towered higher than mountains, navigating currents that flowed with the force of cosmic transformation. The couple witnessed the death throes of their world as Ymir's body underwent its metamorphosis into the foundation of ordered reality. They saw his flesh solidifying into earth, his bones rising to form mountain ranges, and his skull expanding to become the dome of the sky. This first-hand observation of cosmic restructuring gave them unique insights into the nature of the new world they would inhabit. During the voyage, Bergelmir's wife demonstrated abilities that complemented her husband's practical skills. While he managed the vessel's navigation through treacherous currents, she maintained their supplies and monitored the changing conditions around them. Her keen observation of the flood's patterns allowed the couple to identify safe harbours and avoid the most dangerous whirlpools that marked locations where Ymir's transformation was proceeding with particular violence. Her contributions proved so valuable that later giant traditions would emphasise the importance of female wisdom in matters of survival and adaptation. The couple's eventual landfall occurred in what would become the eastern regions of the newly formed world, territories that the gods had not yet claimed for their own purposes. The landscape they encountered bore little resemblance to the chaotic environment within Ymir's body, where they had previously dwelled. Solid ground replaced the shifting surfaces of their ancestors' flesh, while stable weather patterns began to establish themselves according to the natural laws the gods had imposed upon their ordered cosmos. These changes required significant adjustments from the surviving giants, who needed to develop new methods of shelter, food procurement, and social organisation. Bergelmir and his wife faced the challenge of repopulating Giantkind under conditions vastly different from those that had allowed their predecessors to proliferate through spontaneous generation. The new cosmic order required more conventional reproductive processes, though these retained distinctly giant characteristics that distinguished them from the methods later employed by gods and men. Giant children developed more slowly than their divine counterparts, but reached greater size and possessed longer lifespans, traits that reflected their connection to the primordial forces from which their race had originally emerged. The establishment of the first post-flood giant settlement required innovations in architecture and community planning that had been unnecessary during the primordial age. Bergelmir applied his practical skills to the construction of dwellings that could accommodate giant proportions while remaining stable within the new world's more rigid physical laws. His wife contributed knowledge of food preservation and resource management that proved essential for maintaining their growing family through the seasonal cycles that now governed the passage of time. As their descendants multiplied and spread across the territories that would become Jotunheim, Bergelmir and his wife became revered as the founding ancestors of renewed giant civilization. Their survival story was passed down through generations, serving both as historical record and as inspiration for giants facing their own challenges in the structured world the gods had created. The couple's example demonstrated that Giantkind could adapt to new circumstances without abandoning their essential nature as representatives of chaotic force and natural power. The bloodline established by Bergelmir and his wife would eventually produce some of the most significant giants in Norse mythology, including those who would challenge the gods directly and others who would form alliances with divine powers. Their genetic legacy carried forward the essential characteristics of primordial Giantkind, while incorporating new traits that proved advantageous for survival in the post-flood world. This evolutionary development would prove crucial for Giantkind's ability to maintain their opposition to divine order while operating within the constraints of the structured cosmos. Among the most powerful figures to emerge from the ancient giant lineages was Jötnar, whose name meant ancient giant or destroyer, titles that reflected both his antiquity and his fundamental nature as a personification of destructive natural forces. Unlike the more recent giants who had adapted to existence within the ordered cosmos, Fornjotr retained direct connections to the primordial chaos that had characterized the earlier Asgard times. His very presence could destabilize local weather patterns and cause geological disturbances that reminded all who encountered him of the raw power that Giantkind represented. Fornjotr's physical manifestation defied easy description, as his form shifted according to the natural forces he was channeling at any given moment. During periods when he embodied winter storms, his body appeared composed of swirling snow and ice, with features that constantly reformed as winds howled around his massive frame. When representing summer tempests, his appearance incorporated elements of lightning and driving rain, while his voice became the sound of thunder rolling across vast distances. This protean nature made him both fascinating and terrifying to observe. As witnesses could never be certain what aspect of his power they might encounter, the significance of Fornjotr extended beyond his individual capabilities to encompass his role as the progenitor of 3 sons, who would each become major forces within the cosmic order. These offspring represented the division of their father's comprehensive destructive power into more specialized domains, each governing specific aspects of natural force that would play crucial roles in the ongoing relationship between giants and gods. The birth of these sons marked a new phase in giant evolution, as the race began producing individuals whose powers were more focused, but no less formidable than those of their primordial ancestors. Hlær, the eldest of Fornjotr's sons, inherited dominion over the world's oceans, and became known to the gods as Aegir, a title that reflected his role as the personification of the sea's power. His transformation from giant to quasi-divine figure illustrated the complex relationships that could develop between the two races when mutual benefit outweighed their fundamental opposition. Hlær's vast underwater halls became neutral territory where gods and giants could meet without the usual tensions that characterized their interactions on land or in the sky. The ocean realm that Hlær governed possessed characteristics that reflected both his giant heritage and his adaptation to a role that required cooperation with divine powers. His underwater palace featured architecture that combined giant proportions with the flowing aesthetics appropriate to an aquatic environment. The halls could accommodate visitors of any size, from the smallest gods to the largest giants, while maintaining the dignity appropriate to formal diplomatic encounters. The palace's great feast hall hosted gatherings that brought together representatives from multiple realms, serving as one of the few locations where such meetings could occur without immediate risk of violence. Hlær's control over oceanic forces manifested in abilities that surpassed those of most giants or gods when exercised within his aquatic domain. He could summon waves capable of destroying entire coastlines, or calm storms that threatened to devastate shipping routes. His influence extended to all forms of sea life, from the smallest fish to the great sea serpents that dwelt in the deepest ocean trenches. This comprehensive authority over marine environments made him a crucial ally for anyone requiring safe passage across the world's waters and a dangerous enemy for those who earned his displeasure. The relationship between Hlær and his giant heritage remained complex throughout his existence. While he had achieved a status that allowed him to interact peacefully with the gods, he never abandoned his essential nature as a representative of chaotic natural force. His moods could shift as suddenly as ocean weather, transforming him from gracious host to destructive adversary without warning. This unpredictability served as a constant reminder to his divine guests that they were dealing with powers that operated according to different principles than those governing their ordered realm. Logi, the second son of Fornjotr, embodied the destructive power of fire in all its manifestations. Unlike the controlled flames that the gods employed for constructive purposes, Logi represented wildfire, volcanic eruption, and the consuming heat that could reduce entire forests to ash within hours. His domain encompassed not only visible fire, but also the internal heat that drove geological processes and the fever that could destroy living beings from within. This comprehensive authority over thermal energy made him one of the most feared figures in the giant pantheon. Logi's appearance reflected the volatile nature of the forces he controlled. His body seemed to be composed of living flame that flickered between different intensities according to his emotional state and the demands of his current activities. During periods of calm, his form appeared as a tall figure wreathed in gentle flames that provided warmth without causing harm. When aroused to anger or excitement, however, his entire being blazed with such intensity that his presence could ignite flammable materials at considerable distances. His eyes burned like miniature suns, while his breath could melt stone or reduce organic matter to carbon in seconds. The third son, Kari, inherited mastery over the winds and all forms of atmospheric disturbance. His domain included not only the gentle breezes that provided relief during summer heat, but also the devastating hurricanes that could level entire settlements and the bitter gales that brought winter's harshest weather. Kari's influence extended to all forms of air movement, from the subtle currents that carried seeds across vast distances to the violent updrafts that accompanied volcanic eruptions and the downdrafts that could dash flying creatures against the ground. Kari's physical form reflected his connection to atmospheric forces through its apparent lack of solid substance. His body seemed to be composed of constantly moving air that took on visible form through the dust, moisture and other particles it carried along. During gentle weather, his appearance remained relatively stable, allowing observers to discern his features and general outline. During storms, however, his form became a whirling vortex of wind and debris that made direct observation nearly impossible. His voice carried across vast distances when he chose to make it audible, though he could also move in complete silence when stealth served his purposes. The three sons of Fornjota represented a new development in giant evolution, as their specialized domains required them to develop more sophisticated relationships with the ordered cosmos than their predecessors had maintained. While they retained their essential nature as agents of chaotic force, they also needed to operate within the natural laws that governed their respective elements. This adaptation allowed them to achieve greater effectiveness within their specialized areas, while maintaining their opposition to the comprehensive order that the gods sought to impose upon all existence. Among the most ancient and significant figures in giant genealogy stood Nott, the personification of night itself, whose relationships and offspring would create crucial connections between the giant and divine bloodlines. Her antiquity rivaled that of the primordial giants, yet her role in the cosmic order required her to function within the structured time cycles that the gods had established to regulate the passage of days and seasons. This dual nature made her a bridge figure between the chaotic past and the ordered present, embodying both the darkness that had existed before creation and the regulated night that now alternated with day, according to divine plan. Nott's appearance embodied the essential characteristics of nighttime in both its peaceful and threatening aspects. Her skin possessed the deep blue-black colour of the sky during the darkest hours before dawn, while her hair flowed like liquid shadow that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Her eyes gleamed with the cold light of distant stars, providing the only illumination in her immediate vicinity when she chose to make herself visible. Her clothing appeared to be woven from darkness itself, shifting and flowing around her form like captured pieces of the night sky. The giantess's most significant relationship produced Jord, the personification of Earth herself, through a union that represented the fundamental connection between the darkness of night and the solid foundation of the world. This relationship demonstrated the complex ways in which giant and divine essences could combine to produce entities that served essential functions within the cosmic order. Jord's birth from the union of night and an unnamed partner created one of the most important figures in Norse cosmology, as she would eventually become the mother of Thor through her relationship with Odin. The significance of Nott's maternal role extended beyond her immediate offspring to encompass her function as a link between the ancient giant bloodlines and the newer divine dynasties. Her children and descendants would include some of the most important figures in Norse mythology, creating family connections that complicated the supposed opposition between giants and gods. These relationships demonstrated that the cosmic conflict between order and chaos was not simply a matter of two separate races fighting for dominance, but rather a complex web of alliances, enmities, and family obligations that defied simple categorization. The ancient giant Narfi, father of Nott, represented one of the earliest examples of the complex family relationships that would characterize Norse cosmology throughout its development. His position as the progenitor of night itself established his importance within the cosmic hierarchy, while his giant heritage ensured that this importance would always carry implications for the ongoing tension between chaotic and ordered forces. Narfi's existence predated the establishment of most cosmic institutions, placing him among the foundational figures whose actions and relationships shaped the basic parameters of reality itself. Narfi's role as Nott's father created genealogical connections that would eventually link giant bloodlines directly to the most important divine figures in the Norse pantheon. Through Nott's daughter Jord, Narfi became the great-grandfather of Thor, one of the most significant gods in the Aesir pantheon and the primary defender of divine order against giant threats. This family relationship created a fundamental irony within the cosmic structure, as the god most famous for battling giants was himself descended from their ancient bloodlines through his mother's ancestry. These complex genealogical connections illustrated the fundamental interconnectedness of giant and divine bloodlines throughout Norse cosmology. Rather than representing completely separate races locked in eternal conflict, giants and gods shared common ancestors and ongoing family relationships that complicated their supposed opposition. The recognition of these connections would prove crucial for understanding the true nature of the cosmic conflict, and the reasons why complete victory by either side remained impossible within the established order of the Nine Worlds. The ancient bloodlines established by Bergelmir and the primordial survivors had produced generations of giants whose powers became increasingly specialized and focused on specific aspects of natural force. Where their primordial ancestors had embodied chaotic energy in its rawest form, these newer generations developed mastery over particular elements and phenomena, becoming living embodiments of the forces that shaped the physical world. Their abilities transcended simple magical manipulation, representing fundamental connections to the cosmic principles that governed fire, water, earth, and air throughout the Nine Worlds. Among the most formidable of these elemental masters were Aegir and Ran, whose dominion over the world's oceans established them as powers that even the gods approached with careful respect. Aegir, also known by his giant name Hlær, had inherited his oceanic authority from his father Fornjötur, but his union with Ran created a partnership that amplified their individual capabilities into something approaching absolute control over marine environments. Their combined influence extended from the smallest tidal pools to the vast abyssal depths, where creatures unknown to surface dwellers made their homes in perpetual darkness. Aegir's physical presence commanded immediate attention through its sheer scale and the obvious power it represented. His height exceeded that of most giants, while his build suggested the massive strength required to manipulate oceanic forces on a global scale. His beard flowed like sea foam, constantly shifting between white and grey as it captured and reflected the changing moods of the waters he controlled. His skin bore the blue-green tint of deep ocean water, marked with patterns that resembled the play of sunlight filtering through waves. When he moved, the sound of distant surf accompanied his footsteps, while his voice carried the rhythmic cadence of waves breaking against rocky shores. Ran's appearance complemented her husband's oceanic nature, while emphasizing her more predatory aspects. Her hair moved with the fluid grace of underwater currents, its dark green strands seeming to float even when no breeze stirred the air around her. Her eyes held the cold depths of winter seas, promising both beauty and danger to those who met her gaze. Her hands, which appeared delicate at first glance, possessed the strength necessary to drag even the largest vessels beneath the waves when their crews earned her displeasure. Her clothing seemed woven from captured sea spray that never quite dried, shimmering with the phosphorescence of deep water creatures. The underwater hall that served as Aegir and Ran's primary residence represented one of the most impressive architectural achievements in any of the 9 worlds. Built within a massive underwater cavern that the couple had carved from the ocean floor using controlled tidal forces, the structure combined the proportions necessary to accommodate giant visitors with the flowing aesthetics appropriate to its aquatic environment. The walls appeared to be constructed from compressed coral and crystallized sea salt, materials that provided both structural integrity and natural illumination through their ability to capture and reflect the filtered sunlight that penetrated the ocean depths. The hall's great feast chamber could accommodate hundreds of guests simultaneously, with seating arrangements that recognized the complex hierarchies governing relationships between different types of sea dwellers. Elevated platforms provided appropriate positions for visiting gods, while lower areas offered comfortable spaces for various categories of giants, sea spirits, and other marine entities. The chamber's acoustics had been carefully designed to allow conversation at normal volume levels, despite the constant background sound of moving water, while the lighting system utilised bioluminescent organisms to provide steady illumination without the harsh brightness that would disturb deep-sea creatures. The most notorious aspect of Aegir and Ran's underwater domain was its collection of drowned sailors, warriors and travellers whose vessels had succumbed to oceanic violence. These unfortunate souls occupied a complex position within the hall's social hierarchy, serving simultaneously as honoured guests and permanent prisoners. Their presence reflected Ran's particular responsibility for claiming those who died at sea, a function that required her to maintain careful records of maritime casualties and ensure that each drowned individual received appropriate treatment according to their status and the circumstances of their death. The drowned inhabitants of the underwater hall retained their human or divine appearances, but bore the unmistakable marks of their oceanic deaths. Their skin possessed the pale translucency of long submersion, while their hair moved with the same fluid grace that characterized Ran's own lot. Their clothing, preserved by the hall's unique environment, displayed the salt stains and water damage that marked their final voyages. Despite their grim circumstances, these permanent residents maintained their individual personalities and memories, creating a diverse community that provided their hosts with information about events occurring throughout the surface world. The 9 daughters born to Aegir and Ran represented the personification of different types of ocean waves, each embodying specific characteristics of marine movement and behaviour. These wave maidens possessed individual names and distinct personalities that reflected their particular aspects of oceanic force. Himinglava, whose name meant heaven bright, embodied the gentle swells that caught and reflected sunlight during calm weather. Dufa represented the diving waves that plunged beneath the surface before rising again with renewed force. Bloducheida, bloody hair, personified the violent breakers that turned red with reflected sunset light, or the blood of those caught in maritime disasters. Each wave maiden possessed the ability to manifest as both an abstract oceanic force and a physical entity capable of independent action. In their elemental forms, they appeared as distinctive patterns of water movement that experienced sailors could recognize and predict. When taking physical shape, they resembled their parents in their obvious connection to marine environments, while displaying individual characteristics that distinguished them from their sisters. Their collective activities created the complex patterns of oceanic behaviour that affected weather, navigation, and the survival of all who ventured onto the world's waters. The Wave Maiden's most significant collective action involved their role in the birth of Heimdall, the divine guardian of Bifrost who would serve as watchman for the gods throughout the cosmic cycle leading to Ragnarok. The 9 sisters served as Heimdall's mothers through a mysterious process that combined their oceanic essences with divine seed to produce a being whose abilities surpassed those of typical gods. This unusual birth created family connections between the oceanic giants and the Aesir that would influence their relationships throughout subsequent ages, demonstrating once again the complex web of kinship that linked supposedly opposing cosmic forces. The relationship between Aegir, Ran, and their daughters with the divine powers of Asgard exemplified the pragmatic cooperation that could develop between giants and gods when mutual benefit outweighed their fundamental philosophical differences. The oceanic giants provided essential services that the gods required but could not easily perform themselves, including safe passage across dangerous waters, accurate weather predictions, and information about events occurring in distant realms. In exchange, the gods offered protection from their more militant divine colleagues and recognition of the ocean ruler's legitimate authority within their aquatic domain. This cooperative relationship remained constantly vulnerable to disruption through misunderstandings or conflicts involving other members of either community. The gods' ongoing campaigns against hostile giant clans created tensions that affected even friendly giant-divine relationships, while Ran's predatory nature occasionally brought her into conflict with divine interests when her collection of drowned souls included individuals the gods preferred to see survive. These periodic crises required careful diplomatic management to prevent the breakdown of agreements that benefited both sides. The elemental mastery displayed by Aegir and Ran represented only one aspect of the specialized powers that had emerged among the giant bloodlines. In the fiery realm of Muspelheim, Surtur stood as the ultimate embodiment of destructive flame, wielding a sword whose heat exceeded that of the sun itself. His role as guardian of the southern fire realm placed him in a position of cosmic significance that rivaled that of the greatest gods, while his prophesied function as the destroyer of worlds during Ragnarok made him perhaps the most feared individual in all the 9 worlds. Surtur's physical form reflected his connection to the most intense forms of thermal energy. His body appeared to be composed of living flame that burned with such intensity that his mere presence could ignite flammable materials at considerable distances. His height exceeded that of most giants, while his proportions suggested the massive strength required to wield weapons, forged from materials that would instantly vaporize in ordinary hands. His skin glowed with the white-hot intensity of molten metal, marked with patterns that resembled the flow of lava through volcanic channels. His hair blazed like a crown of fire, while his eyes burned with the concentrated heat of stellar cores. The flaming sword that Surtur carried represented the pinnacle of fire giant craftsmanship and magical enhancement. The weapon's blade had been forged from materials that existed only within the most extreme thermal environments, tempered in fires that burned hotter than those found in ordinary volcanic activity. The sword's edge could cut through any known substance, while its heat signature created visible distortions in the air around it, even when the weapon remained sheathed. The blade's length exceeded that of weapons designed for normal-sized wielders, requiring Surtur's giant strength to manipulate effectively in combat situations. The cosmic significance of Surtur's sword extended beyond its immediate destructive capabilities to encompass its prophesied role in the final destruction of the ordered world. According to the prophecies that governed the cosmic cycle, Surtur would use his flaming blade to set fire to the world tree itself during the events of Ragnarok, consuming not only the physical structures of the 9 worlds, but also the magical forces that maintained their separation and individual characteristics. This ultimate act of destruction would clear the way for the emergence of a new cosmic order, though the nature of that future reality remained unclear to those living within the current cycle. Surtur's position as guardian of Muspelheim required him to maintain the barriers that prevented the realm's intense thermal energies from spreading into adjacent worlds where they would cause catastrophic damage. This responsibility demanded constant vigilance and the ability to manipulate fire on a scale that exceeded the capabilities of other elemental masters. His success in containing Muspelheim's destructive potential demonstrated the sophisticated control that the most powerful giants could exercise over their respective domains, even when those domains contained forces capable of destroying entire worlds. The relationship between Surtur and the other cosmic powers remained complex throughout the ages preceding Ragnarok. While his ultimate role as world destroyer placed him in fundamental opposition to the gods' efforts to maintain cosmic order, his function as guardian of Muspelheim served their interests by preventing premature destruction of the Nine Worlds. This paradoxical situation created a form of detente between the fire giant and the divine powers, with both sides recognizing their mutual interest in preserving the current cosmic arrangement until the prophesied time of ending arrived. The theft of Thor's hammer Mjolnir by the giant king Thrym demonstrated both the audacity of giant ambitions and the elaborate deceptions that could develop when giants and gods engaged in direct confrontation. Thrym ruled over one of the most powerful giant clans in eastern Jotunheim, commanding resources and followers that made him confident enough to challenge divine authority through direct action. His successful theft of the Thunder God's primary weapon represented one of the most significant victories achieved by giant forces against divine power, though the ultimate outcome would prove less favourable to giant interests. Thrym's physical presence reflected his status as a giant king through its combination of impressive size and obvious wealth. His height placed him among the larger specimens of Giantkind, while his muscular build demonstrated the personal strength that had helped establish his authority over his followers. His clothing incorporated materials and decorations that showcased his clan's prosperity, including furs from creatures found only in the most dangerous regions of Jotunheim, and jewellery crafted from metals unknown in other realms. His weapons and armour displayed the sophisticated metalworking techniques that giant smiths had developed to serve their oversized clientele. The theft itself required careful planning and precise execution, as Mjolnir's magical properties made it one of the most heavily protected artifacts in the divine arsenal. Thrym's agents had spent considerable time studying Thor's habits and identifying opportunities when the hammer might be vulnerable to acquisition. The successful completion of their mission demonstrated the intelligence networks and operational capabilities that the most sophisticated giant clans could deploy when pursuing objectives that required subtlety rather than brute force. Thrym's demands for the hammer's return revealed both his strategic thinking and his fundamental misunderstanding of divine psychology. By requesting Freya as his bride in exchange for Mjolnir's return, the Giant King demonstrated his awareness of the goddess's importance within the Aesir pantheon, while failing to recognize the lengths to which the gods would go to avoid surrendering one of their most valued members. His assumption that the gods would accept such an exchange reflected the transactional approach that characterized most giant divine negotiations, where both sides typically offered concrete benefits in return for specific concessions. The elaborate deception that the gods devised to recover Mjolnir showcased their willingness to employ trickery and disguise when direct confrontation proved impractical. The plan to dress Thor as a bride and present him to Thrym as Freya required careful attention to detail and the cooperation of multiple divine participants. Loki's role as the disguised Thor's bridesmaid demonstrated his particular talents for deception and improvisation, while the other gods' willingness to participate in such an undignified charade illustrated their recognition of Mjolnir's crucial importance to their defensive capabilities. The wedding feast that Thrym organised to celebrate his supposed union with Freya revealed both his genuine desire to establish peaceful relationships with the divine powers and his naive confidence in his ability to detect deception. The Giant King's preparations for the ceremony demonstrated his understanding of the protocols governing formal relationships between giants and gods, while his failure to penetrate the disguises worn by his divine guests showed the limitations of giant perceptual abilities when confronted with determined divine trickery. The violent conclusion of the deception, when Thor revealed his true identity and used the recovered Mjolnir to slaughter Thrymr and his wedding guests, demonstrated the gods' willingness to employ extreme measures when their core interests were threatened. The massacre that followed the hammer's recovery eliminated not only Thrymr himself but also many of the most powerful members of his clan, significantly reducing the military capabilities of one of Jotunheim's most formidable political entities. This outcome served as a warning to other giant leaders about the consequences of challenging divine authority too directly. The figure of Utgarda-Loki represented a different approach to giant divine relations, emphasizing intellectual superiority and magical manipulation rather than direct confrontation or negotiation. His mastery of illusion and reality alteration made him one of the most dangerous opponents the gods ever encountered, capable of creating situations where even their greatest strengths became irrelevant or counterproductive. His elaborate contests with Thor and his companions reveal the limitations of divine power when confronted with sufficiently sophisticated magical opposition. Utgarda-Loki's physical appearance reflected his nature as a master of deception and illusion. His features seemed to shift subtly depending on the angle from which they were viewed, making it difficult for observers to form clear mental images of his actual appearance. His clothing appeared to be woven from materials that changed colour and texture according to lighting conditions and the observer's expectations. His voice carried multiple tones simultaneously, creating an unsettling effect that made listeners uncertain about which words he had actually spoken and which they had merely imagined hearing. The contest that Utgarda-Loki arranged for his divine visitors demonstrated his sophisticated understanding of both giant capabilities and divine psychology. Each challenge appeared to test abilities that the gods possessed in abundance while actually requiring skills or knowledge that they lacked entirely. The eating contest between Loki and the giant's champion revealed the fire god's limitations when confronted with the personification of wildfire itself. Thor's drinking challenge illustrated the thunder god's inability to drain the ocean regardless of his legendary thirst. The wrestling match between Thor and an elderly giantess demonstrated that even divine strength meant nothing when opposed by the abstract concept of old age. The revelation of these deceptions after this contest completion served multiple purposes within Utgarda-Loki's broader strategy. By explaining the true nature of each challenge, he demonstrated his superior knowledge and magical capabilities, while simultaneously showing respect for his guests' efforts and achievements. The explanations also served as a form of instruction, teaching the gods about the limitations of their powers and the existence of forces that operated beyond their direct control or influence. The philosophical implications of Utgarda-Loki's demonstrations extended beyond their immediate entertainment value to encompass fundamental questions about the nature of reality and the relationship between perception and truth. His ability to create convincing illusions that affected not only visual appearance but also physical properties challenged the gods' assumptions about their ability to distinguish between authentic and artificial phenomena. These revelations forced divine visitors to reconsider their confidence in their own perceptual abilities and their understanding of the cosmic forces they claimed to govern. The long-term consequences of the encounters with Utgarda-Loki influenced divine policy toward giant relations for generations afterward. The gods' recognition that giants possessed capabilities they had not previously suspected led to more cautious approaches in subsequent dealings with giant individuals and communities. The realization that their own powers had limitations they had not recognized prompted increased efforts to identify and address potential vulnerabilities in their defensive preparations and strategic planning. The most numerous and implacably hostile of all giant clans, the Hrimthursar emerged from the coldest reaches of Jotunheim as living embodiments of winter's deadly embrace. These frost giants represented the harshest aspects of their primordial heritage, having adapted over countless generations to thrive in environments that would prove fatal to most other forms of life. Their territories stretched across the northern wastes of the giant realm, where temperatures dropped so low that ordinary ice became as hard as stone, and the very air could freeze the breath in one's lungs. Unlike their more temperate-dwelling relatives who had learned to coexist with the ordered world the gods had created, the Hrimthursar remained fundamentally opposed to any form of warmth or civilization that threatened their frozen domain. The physical characteristics of the frost giants reflected their intimate connection to the most extreme cold. Their skin possessed a blue-white pallor that seemed to absorb rather than reflect light, creating an unsettling visual effect that made them appear to fade into the snowy landscapes they inhabited. Ice crystals formed naturally in their hair and beards, creating intricate patterns that shifted and reformed with each movement. Their breath emerged as visible clouds even in the coldest weather, while their touch could freeze water instantly and cause frostbite in living creatures within seconds of contact. Their eyes held the pale intensity of winter sunlight reflecting off snow, capable of seeing clearly through blizzards that would blind other beings entirely. The largest among the Hrimthursar achieved sizes that dwarfed even their giant relatives, with some individuals reaching heights that allowed them to wade through snowdrifts that would bury entire settlements. These massive frost giants possessed strength proportional to their size, capable of hurling boulders the size of buildings or creating avalanches through their footsteps alone. Their movements generated localized weather disturbances, causing temperatures to plummet and snow to begin falling even during otherwise clear conditions. When multiple frost giants gathered in the same location, their combined presence could trigger blizzards that lasted for weeks and extended their influence across vast territories. The social structure of the Hrimthursar operated according to principles that reflected their harsh environment and hostile nature. Leadership positions went to those individuals who demonstrated the greatest resistance to cold and the most effective mastery of winter magic. These frost giant chieftains commanded the respect of their followers through displays of power that included the ability to freeze entire lakes with a gesture or summon ice storms that could devastate enemy territories. The hierarchies within frost giant clans remained fluid, as challengers could advance their positions by demonstrating superior cold weather capabilities or by successfully leading raids against warmer territories. The territories controlled by the Hrimthursar encompassed some of the most inhospitable regions within Jotunheim, areas where the boundary between the giant realm and the primordial ice realm of Niflheim became increasingly difficult to distinguish. These frozen wastes featured landscapes carved by glacial activity that operated according to the will of their giant inhabitants, rather than natural geological processes. Ice formations rose like crystalline cities from the tundra, their spires and walls shaped by frost giant architects who possessed an intuitive understanding of frozen water's structural properties. These ice cities could be expanded or relocated according to the strategic needs of their inhabitants, providing defensive positions that could be modified rapidly in response to changing tactical situations. Within these frozen strongholds, the Hrimthursar developed technologies and crafting techniques specifically adapted to their frigid environment. Their weapons were forged from ice so hard it could shatter steel, treated with magical processes that prevented melting even when exposed to intense heat. These ice weapons possessed edges sharper than the finest metal blades, while maintaining the flexibility necessary for effective combat use. The frost giant's armour incorporated similar materials, creating protective gear that provided excellent defence, while allowing the freedom of movement essential for their preferred fighting styles. The most feared aspect of frost giant military capability lay in their mastery of winter weather as a weapon of war. Individual Hrimthursar could generate localized blizzards that obscured vision and made movement treacherous for their enemies while providing perfect concealment for their own forces. Groups of frost giants working in coordination could create weather systems that extended across entire regions, bringing killing cold to areas that normally enjoyed temperate climates. These weather weapons proved particularly effective against divine forces, as even the gods found their abilities diminished when operating in conditions of extreme cold for extended periods. The frost giants' relationship with their environment extended beyond simple adaptation to encompass a form of symbiosis that allowed them to draw strength directly from winter conditions. The colder their surroundings became, the more powerful individual Hrimthursar grew, while exposure to warmth weakened them proportionally. This environmental dependency created strategic advantages and vulnerabilities that influenced their military tactics and settlement patterns. Frost giant armies fought most effectively during winter months and in northern territories, while their power diminished significantly when forced to operate in warmer climates or during summer seasons. Among Ymir's direct descendants, the six-headed giant represented the most grotesque manifestation of the chaotic reproductive potential that had characterized the primordial age. This monstrous offspring embodied the dangers inherent in unchecked procreation, demonstrating how the life-generating forces that had originally populated the cosmos could produce abominations when operating without the constraints that normally governed biological development. The creature's multiple heads possessed individual consciousness and personalities, creating internal conflicts that made coordinated action nearly impossible while amplifying its capacity for destruction through the sheer unpredictability of its behaviour. Each of the six-headed giant's heads displayed different characteristics that reflected various aspects of primordial chaos. The first head possessed features that resembled those of Ymir himself, with the blue-tinged skin and frost-rimmed features of the original frost giant. The second head bore the characteristics of a fire giant, with skin that glowed like heated metal and eyes that burned with internal flame. The third displayed the shifting, insubstantial features of a wind giant, its outline constantly blurring as if composed of moving air. The fourth head appeared to be carved from living stone, representing the earth giant bloodline, while the fifth showed the flowing characteristics of a water giant. The sixth head defied easy categorization, its features constantly shifting between different forms as if unable to settle on a stable appearance. The conflicts between these different aspects of the six-headed giant's nature created a creature that was simultaneously incredibly powerful and completely unreliable. When the heads agreed on a course of action, their combined strength could accomplish feats that challenged even the most powerful gods. However, such cooperation occurred rarely, as the different heads' conflicting natures and competing desires usually prevented sustained coordinated effort. More commonly, the creature's actions resulted from the temporary dominance of one head over the others, leading to behaviours that reflected only a fraction of its total capabilities while creating internal tensions that limited its effectiveness. The six-headed giant's reproductive capabilities presented unique dangers that concerned both gods and giants. Each head possessed the ability to generate offspring independently, potentially creating multiple bloodlines simultaneously. However, the chaotic nature of these reproductive processes meant that the resulting offspring often displayed even more extreme variations and instabilities than their parent. Some possessed multiple heads like their progenitor, while others manifested single heads but with characteristics drawn randomly from different elemental bloodlines. These unpredictable offspring created populations that were difficult to control or predict, representing potential threats to the stability of any region they inhabited. The presence of such chaotic offspring within the giant population served as a constant reminder of the dangers inherent in their primordial heritage. While most giant bloodlines had achieved some degree of stability through generations of adaptation to the ordered cosmos, the descendants of the six-headed giant retained the unpredictable characteristics of the earliest times. Their existence challenged the assumptions that both the giants and gods had developed about the nature of their respective races, demonstrating that the forces of primordial chaos remained active within the cosmic order and could manifest without warning in new and dangerous forms. The giant builders and craftsmen represented a different aspects of their race's relationship with the ordered cosmos. demonstrating that giant capabilities extended far beyond simple destruction and opposition to divine authority. These skilled individuals possessed technical knowledge and artistic abilities that rivaled or exceeded those of the gods themselves, creating works of architecture and engineering that showcased the sophisticated potential of giant civilization. Their willingness to undertake construction projects for divine clients illustrated the pragmatic cooperation that could develop between the races when mutual benefit outweighed their fundamental philosophical differences. The unnamed giant who constructed Asgard's protective wall exemplified both the remarkable abilities of giant craftsmen and the dangerous ambitions that motivated their most significant projects. His proposal to build defences capable of protecting the divine realm from all possible attacks demonstrated his confidence in his technical abilities while revealing his understanding of the god's strategic vulnerabilities. The price he demanded for his services, Freyja as his bride, along with the sun and moon, indicated his awareness of the true value of his work and his willingness to exploit the god's desperation for effective defences. The construction techniques employed by the giant builder showcased methods and technologies unknown to divine craftsmen. His ability to move massive stone blocks without apparent effort suggested mastery of magical principles that the gods had not yet discovered or developed. The precision with which he shaped and fitted the wall's components demonstrated mathematical and engineering knowledge that exceeded the standards typically associated with giant culture. His work progressed with supernatural speed, completing in months what would have required years of effort from conventional construction crews. The giant's supernatural horse, Svadilfari, proved crucial to the success of the construction project, demonstrating the sophisticated relationships that existed between giants and the magical creatures that served them. This remarkable stallion possessed strength that exceeded that of ordinary horses by several orders of magnitude, capable of hauling stone blocks that weighed many tons across difficult terrain without apparent strain. The horse's intelligence rivaled that of many giants, allowing it to work independently when necessary and to anticipate its master's needs without constant direction. The partnership between giant and horse represented a level of cooperation between different species that the gods found both impressive and somewhat disturbing. The gods' growing concern about the giant's progress led to increasingly desperate measures designed to prevent completion of the wall within the agreed time frame. Their recognition that the builder was likely to succeed in his task forced them to confront the possibility of losing Freyja, the sun, and the moon, a price that would effectively destroy their civilization even while providing the defences they desperately needed. This dilemma illustrated the fundamental problem with giant divine cooperation. The giant's capabilities often exceeded divine expectations, creating situations where successful completion of agreed-upon tasks would produce results the gods found unacceptable. Loki's intervention in the form of Ymir who distracted Svadilfari represented the gods' willingness to employ deception and sabotage when direct confrontation proved impractical. The transformation required magical abilities that few gods possessed, while the successful seduction of the giant's horse demanded intimate knowledge of equine behaviour and psychology. The resulting delay in construction provided the gods with the technical excuse they needed to avoid paying the agreed-upon price, while still benefiting from the substantial progress the giant had made on their defensive wall. The violent conclusion of the construction project, when Thor killed the giant builder upon discovering his true nature, demonstrated the gods' fundamental unwillingness to honour agreements with giant contractors when the results exceeded their expectations. The builder's death eliminated not only a potential threat, but also one of the most skilled craftsmen in any of the 9 worlds, representing a significant loss of technical knowledge and artistic capability. The gods' decision to keep the partially completed wall while murdering its creator established a precedent for their treatment of giant contractors that would influence future negotiations between the races. The Winter Giants' constant warfare with the gods represented more than simple territorial disputes or resource competition. It embodied the eternal struggle between the life-giving warmth of civilization and the death-dealing cold of the wilderness. This conflict operated on multiple levels simultaneously, encompassing physical battles between armies, magical contests between powerful individuals, and philosophical disagreements about the nature of existence itself. The frost giants viewed the gods' promotion of warmth and order as a fundamental threat to their way of life, while the gods saw the winter giants' activities as attempts to return the cosmos to the lifeless state that had characterized the primordial void. The military tactics employed by the Hrimthursar in their campaigns against divine territories reflected their intimate understanding of winter warfare and their ability to weaponize cold itself. Frost giant armies typically launched their major offensives during the coldest months of the year, when their powers reached peak effectiveness and their divine opponents faced the greatest environmental challenges. These winter campaigns combined conventional military assaults with magical attacks designed to extend winter conditions far beyond their normal geographical and seasonal limits. The frost giants' preferred strategy involved the gradual expansion of winter conditions into territories normally protected by divine influence. Small groups of Hrimthursar would establish concealed positions in mountainous or forested areas, using their powers to create localized zones of extreme cold that gradually expanded outward. These frozen zones served as staging areas for larger forces, while simultaneously weakening the divine magic that maintained temperate conditions in the surrounding regions. Over time, these expanding cold zones could merge to create vast areas of artificial winter that persisted even during summer months. The divine response to frost giant incursions typically involved rapid deployment of forces specialized in combating cold weather opponents. Thor's role as the primary defender against giant threats made him the god's most important asset in these conflicts, as his hammer's lightning could generate enough heat to counteract localized frost giant magic, while his physical strength allowed him to engage even the largest Hrimthursar in direct combat. However, the god's reliance on a single champion created strategic vulnerabilities that the frost giants attempted to exploit through coordinated attacks designed to overwhelm Thor's ability to respond to multiple threats simultaneously. The magical aspects of the winter giants' warfare extended beyond simple weather manipulation to encompass more sophisticated forms of reality alteration. The most powerful Hrimthursar could create zones where the normal laws governing temperature and energy conservation ceased to function, allowing them to generate cold that exceeded what should have been physically possible. These magical cold zones could freeze fire itself, turning flames into ice crystals while maintaining their original shapes. The psychological effects of such impossible phenomena often proved as devastating as their physical impact, as opponents found their understanding of natural law challenged by experiences that defied rational explanation. The frost giants' siege techniques incorporated their environmental advantages into comprehensive strategies designed to force opponents into prolonged exposure to killing cold. Rather than attempting to breach fortifications through direct assault, Hrimthursar armies would surround enemy positions and use their collective powers to create blizzard conditions that persisted for weeks or months. These artificial winter storms prevented resupply efforts, while gradually weakening defensive structures through repeated freeze-thaw cycles that caused stone and metal to crack and fail. The seasonal nature of the conflict between frost giants and gods created rhythmic patterns of warfare that influenced the development of both civilizations over extended periods. During winter months, when the Hrimthursar held significant advantages, the gods typically adopted defensive strategies focused on protecting their most important territories and populations. Summer brought renewed divine offensives designed to reclaim territories lost during the previous winter and to establish forward positions that could provide early warning of future frost giant movements. The cyclical nature of frost giant warfare established patterns that would persist throughout the cosmic ages, but beyond these seasonal conflicts emerged individual giantesses whose influence transcended the simple opposition between winter and warmth. These female giants possessed capabilities that distinguished them from their male counterparts, wielding powers that operated through wisdom, prophecy, and ancient knowledge rather than brute force or elemental manipulation. Their abilities drew upon sources of power that predated the current cosmic order, connecting them to the fundamental forces that had shaped reality during the earliest ages of existence. Among the most mysterious and influential of these figures were the Volva, giantess seers whose prophetic abilities allowed them to perceive the threads of fate that connected past, present, and future into a single comprehensible pattern. These seers possessed knowledge that exceeded that of even the wisest gods, understanding the cosmic forces that govern the development of the 9 worlds and the ultimate destiny that awaited all their inhabitants. Their prophecies carried weight that compelled attention from gods and giants alike, as their accuracy had been proven through countless generations of fulfilled predictions. The unnamed Volva who delivered the great prophecy known as the Voluspa stood as the most significant of these prophetic giantesses, her vision encompassing the entire span of cosmic history, from the primordial void to the world's ultimate destruction and renewal. Her appearance reflected her ancient wisdom through features that seemed to shift between different ages, sometimes appearing as a young woman with clear eyes and smooth skin, other times manifesting as an elderly crone whose face bore the accumulated weight of countless centuries. Her clothing appeared to be woven from materials that existed partially outside normal reality, fabrics that shimmered with colours that had no names, and patterns that hurt the eyes of those who looked too closely. The seers possessed the ability to perceive time as a single unified structure, rather than as a linear progression of sequential events. This temporal awareness allowed her to witness the consequences of actions before they were taken, and to understand the complex web of cause and effect that connected seemingly unrelated occurrences across vast spans of time. Her prophecies emerged not as predictions of possible futures, but as observations of events that had already occurred from her unique perspective outside normal temporal flow. The cosmic knowledge contained within the Voluspa encompassed details about the creation of the world that even the gods who had participated in those events had forgotten or never fully understood. The seeress described the primordial void with precision that could only come from direct observation, recounting the emergence of Ymir and the first giants with intimate familiarity. Her account of the world's creation from the primordial giant's body included details about the process that the gods themselves had not consciously recognized during their work of cosmic restructuring. The prophecy's description of the current age revealed the seeress's understanding of the complex relationships that governed interactions between gods, giants, and the other inhabitants of the 9 worlds. She identified the key figures whose actions would determine the course of future events, describing their motivations and conflicts with the clarity that came from perceiving their ultimate consequences. Her knowledge extended to the most private thoughts and secret plans of gods and giants, suggesting access to information sources that transcended normal methods of observation and communication. The Volva's account of Ragnarok provided the most detailed and terrifying vision of cosmic destruction ever recorded, describing the sequence of events that would lead to the death of gods and the burning of the world tree. Her prophecy identified the specific individuals who would play crucial roles in the final conflict, including the monsters that would devour the sun and moon, the serpent that would poison the sky, and the fire giant who would set the world ablaze. These predictions carried the weight of absolute certainty, presenting the coming destruction not as a possibility to be avoided, but as an inevitable conclusion to the current cosmic cycle. The seeress's vision extended beyond the destruction to encompass the renewal that would follow, describing the emergence of a new world from the ashes of the old and the survival of certain gods and humans who would populate the renewed cosmos. This aspect of her prophecy provided hope that balanced the terror of the destruction she foretold, suggesting that the cosmic cycle included mechanisms for regeneration as well as termination, Her description of the new world hinted at improvements over the current order, implying that the destruction and renewal serve purposes beyond simple repetition of existing patterns. The delivery of the Voluspa required magical techniques that allowed the seeress to compress vast amounts of cosmic knowledge into forms that mortal minds could comprehend without being destroyed by the experience. The prophecy's structure reflected this necessity, presenting information in symbolic and metaphorical forms that protected listeners from the full impact of direct cosmic revelation, while still conveying essential truths about reality's nature and destiny. The seeress's ability to perform this translation between cosmic and comprehensible knowledge demonstrated magical skills that exceeded those of any other known practitioner. Angrboda, whose name meant bringer of grief, occupied a unique position within giant society as the mother of 3 children who would play crucial roles in the cosmic drama leading to Ragnarok. Her relationship with Loki, the shape-changing god whose loyalty to the Aesir remained perpetually questionable, produced offspring whose monstrous natures reflected the chaotic potential that resulted from unions between divine and giant bloodlines. These children, Fenrir the wolf, Jormungandr the world serpent, and Hel the ruler of the dead, would each become central figures in the final conflict that would destroy the current cosmic order. Angrboda's physical appearance reflected her dual nature as both a giantess of considerable power and the mother of creatures that transcended normal categories of existence. Her height exceeded that of most giants, while her build suggested the strength necessary to bear and raise children whose size and capabilities far exceeded those of ordinary offspring. Her features combined the harsh beauty characteristic of her race with subtle indications of the otherworldly forces that influenced her reproductive capabilities. Her eyes held depths that seemed to contain glimpses of the grief and destruction that her name promised, while her expression suggested intimate familiarity with sorrows that had not yet come to pass. The conception and birth of Angrboda's children occurred through processes that operated beyond the normal biological laws governing reproduction in other species. Her union with Loki combined giant and divine essences in ways that amplified the chaotic potential inherent in both bloodlines, creating offspring whose natures reflected the most extreme possibilities contained within their mixed heritage. The pregnancy itself lasted longer than normal gestations, as the developing children required additional time to achieve the size and complexity that would characterize their adult forms. Fenrir's birth as a wolf cub, whose growth rate exceeded all normal parameters, created immediate concerns among both giants and gods, who recognized the potential threat represented by his developing capabilities. The young wolf's intelligence rivaled that of giants and gods, while his physical strength increased daily at rates that suggested he would eventually surpass even the most powerful members of either race. His appetite proved equally remarkable, requiring quantities of food that challenged his mother's ability to provide adequate nourishment during his crucial developmental phases. Angrboda's relationship with her wolf son combined maternal affection with realistic assessment of his dangerous potential. She recognized that Fenrir's nature would eventually bring him into conflict with the cosmic order that the gods had established, while her love for her child created emotional complications that influenced her own attitudes toward the divine powers. Her efforts to provide appropriate guidance for a creature whose destiny involved the destruction of gods required wisdom that transcended normal parental experience. Jormungandr's emergence as a serpent whose eventual size would allow him to encircle the entire world presented different challenges for his giant mother. The young serpent's growth occurred primarily through length rather than mass, requiring feeding strategies that could provide the nutrients necessary for his expanding body without overwhelming Angrboda's resources. His developing venom glands produced toxins whose potency exceeded those of ordinary snakes by factors that defied measurement, creating handling difficulties that tested even his mother's giant constitution. The world serpent's intelligence manifested differently from his wolf brothers, operating through patterns of thought that reflected his reptilian nature while maintaining the complexity appropriate to his cosmic significance. His understanding of aquatic environments developed rapidly, as his destiny required him to inhabit the oceans that surrounded Midgard. Angrboda's guidance during his early development focused on preparing him for the marine existence that would define his adult life, teaching him to navigate underwater currents and to hunt the sea creatures that would sustain him during his growth to world-encircling proportions. Hel's birth as a being whose body displayed both living and dead characteristics created the most complex parenting challenges that Angrboda faced among her 3 children. The infant's appearance combined normal flesh with areas of decay and skeletal exposure, creating a visual effect that disturbed even giants accustomed to unusual physical manifestations. Her dual nature required feeding methods that could nourish both her living and dead aspects, while her emotional development proceeded according to patterns that reflected her future role as ruler of deceased souls. Angrboda's relationship with Hel involved preparing her daughter for responsibilities that would require her to judge and govern the dead from multiple realms and species. This education encompassed not only the practical skills necessary for managing large populations of deceased individuals, but also the emotional detachment required to make fair decisions about souls whose life experiences spanned the full range of moral behaviour. The complexity of these preparations tested Angrboda's own understanding of justice and cosmic balance. The separation of Angrboda from her children, when the gods decided that their continued presence in Jotunheim posed unacceptable risks, created grief that justified her prophetic name. Her knowledge that this separation was inevitable did not diminish the emotional impact of losing contact with offspring, whose development she had guided through their most crucial formative periods. The gods' decision to relocate her children to positions where they could be monitored and contained reflected their recognition of the threat these beings represented, while demonstrating their willingness to inflict suffering on a mother whose only crime had been giving birth to creatures whose natures exceeded normal parameters. Gridda represented a different aspect of giantess nature, demonstrating that members of her race could choose to assist divine causes when their personal values aligned with godly objectives. Her decision to aid Thor during his journey to the Hall of the Giant Geirrodr reflected both her independent moral judgment and her recognition that some conflicts transcended the usual opposition between giants and gods. Her assistance proved crucial to Thor's survival during one of his most dangerous adventures, providing him with magical equipment that compensated for his temporary lack of Mjolnir and other standard protective gear. Gridda's physical appearance reflected her benevolent nature through features that combined typical, giant proportions with expressions that suggested wisdom and compassion rather than hostility or aggression. Her height placed her among the larger specimens of her race, while her build indicated the strength characteristic of giant women without the intimidating bulk that characterized more warlike members of her species. Her clothing and personal effects demonstrated sophisticated craftsmanship, including the magical items she would eventually provide to Thor during his time of need. The iron glove that Gridda gave to Thor possessed properties that exceeded those of normal protective equipment through magical enhancements that she had developed through years of careful study and experimentation. The glove's construction incorporated techniques that combined giant metalworking skills with magical principles derived from ancient sources of knowledge. Its iron construction provided physical protection that could withstand impacts from weapons wielded by the strongest giants, while its magical properties allowed Thor to grip objects that would otherwise prove too hot, cold, or magically charged for safe handling. The staff that accompanied Gridda's other gifts served multiple functions that reflected her understanding of the challenges Thor would face during his mission. The weapon's length provided reach advantages in combat against opponents whose size exceeded even Thor's impressive proportions, while its construction from specially treated wood gave it flexibility that prevented breakage under stress while maintaining the rigidity necessary for effective striking. The staff's magical properties included the ability to channel and focus Thor's lightning powers, compensating for his temporary separation from Mjolnir's familiar capabilities. Gridr's Belt of Strength represented the most sophisticated of her magical creations, incorporating enhancement techniques that amplified the wearer's physical capabilities without creating the dependency problems associated with many magical items. The belt's design allowed it to adjust automatically to fit different body types while maintaining consistent enhancement effects, regardless of the wearer's baseline strength levels. Its magical properties drew upon cosmic forces that operated independently of the wearer's own power sources, ensuring that its benefits remained available even during situations where other magical abilities might be compromised or suppressed. The giantess's decision to assist Thor reflected her personal assessment of the moral issues involved in his conflict with Geirröda, rather than any general alliance with divine causes. Her knowledge of Geirröda's character and methods had convinced her that his planned ambush of Thor represented an abuse of giant hospitality traditions that she found personally offensive. Her assistance served to uphold principles of fair combat and honourable behaviour that transcended racial boundaries, demonstrating that individual giants could make independent moral judgments that sometimes aligned with divine interests. The relationship between Gridr and Thor during his stay in her hall illustrated the potential for positive interactions between giants and gods, when mutual respect and shared values created common ground. Their conversations revealed that both individuals possessed more complex motivations and perspectives than the simple racial antagonism that characterized most giant-divine relationships. Thor's willingness to accept assistance from a giantess demonstrated his pragmatic recognition that survival sometimes required cooperation across traditional enemy lines, while Gridr's aid reflected her commitment to principles that exceeded tribal loyalties. Gerda's story represented one of the most complex examples of giant-divine relations, involving romantic attraction that transcended racial boundaries, while creating consequences that would influence cosmic events throughout the remaining ages before Ragnarok. Her beauty had attracted the attention of Freyja, the Vanir fertility god, whose marriage to her would symbolize the union between divine order and earthly abundance. However, the courtship process required negotiations that would cost Freyja his magical sword, leaving him vulnerable during the final battles that would determine the fate of the cosmos. Gerda's physical appearance embodied the ideal of giant feminine beauty through features that combined impressive scale with perfect proportions and radiant health. Her height exceeded that of divine women while maintaining graceful proportions that emphasized elegance rather than intimidating bulk. Her skin possessed the luminous quality of fresh snow touched by sunlight, while her hair flowed like spun gold that caught and reflected light in patterns that seemed to move independently of any breeze. Her eyes held the deep blue of winter skies, clear and bright with intelligence that matched her physical beauty. The initial encounter between Freyja and Gerda occurred when the god glimpsed her from his seat in Asgard, her beauty proving so overwhelming that it created immediate and irresistible attraction. The distance between the realms that separated them meant that this attraction could only be satisfied through elaborate courtship procedures that would require divine resources and create political complications between the races. Freyja's obsession with the giantess demonstrated the power that physical beauty could wield over even the wisest and most powerful individuals, while his willingness to sacrifice his most valuable possession for her hand revealed the depths of his emotional commitment. The courtship negotiations required the services of Skirnir, Freyja's most trusted servant, who undertook the dangerous journey to Jotunheim to present his master's marriage proposal. The mission's risks extended beyond the obvious dangers of travelling through hostile giant territory to encompass the complex diplomatic challenges involved in arranging a marriage between members of traditionally opposing races. Skirnir's success in completing this mission demonstrated both his personal courage and his sophisticated understanding of giant psychology and social customs. Gerda's initial rejection of Freya's proposal reflected both her awareness of the political complications such a marriage would create, and her natural caution about accepting advances from a member of the race that had killed her giant ancestors and claimed dominion over the cosmos. Her eventual acceptance came only after Skirnir's threats convinced her that refusal would bring consequences more severe than the risks associated with marriage to a god. This coercive element in their courtship created underlying tensions that would influence their subsequent relationship and its cosmic significance. The price demanded for Skirnir's successful completion of his mission, Freya's magical sword, represented one of the most significant strategic sacrifices in divine history. The weapon possessed capabilities that would prove crucial during the battles of Ragnarok, when Freya would face Surtur in single combat without the magical advantages that might have allowed him to survive the encounter. The god's willingness to surrender such a valuable asset demonstrated the overwhelming nature of his attraction to Gerda, while creating vulnerability that would contribute to the ultimate destruction of the cosmic order. The marriage between Freya and Gerda symbolized the union of fertility god and earth goddess, representing the cosmic principle that required cooperation between divine order and natural abundance to maintain the world's productivity. Their relationship embodied the seasonal cycle that governed agricultural productivity, with their harmony ensuring good harvests while their conflicts could bring drought, flood, or other agricultural disasters. The political implications of their union extended beyond personal happiness to encompass the stability of food production throughout the inhabited worlds. The offspring that would result from the marriage between Freya and Gerda carried within their mixed heritage the potential for either unprecedented prosperity or catastrophic disruption of natural cycles. Their children would possess abilities that combined divine control over fertility with giant mastery of earth-based magic, creating individuals whose powers could either enhance or devastate agricultural productivity according to their personal inclinations and the treatment they received from both divine and giant communities. The cosmic significance of these potential offspring made their parents' relationship a matter of concern for all inhabitants of the 9 worlds. The complex web of giant divine relationships that had characterized the cosmic order since the world's creation would produce its most consequential offspring through unions that transcended the traditional boundaries between the races. Among these extraordinary beings, none would prove more significant than the 3 children born to Loki and the giantess Angrboda in the dark forests of Jotunheim. These offspring, Fenrir the wolf, Jormungandr the world's serpent, and Hel the half-dead ruler of the dishonoured dead, embodied the chaotic potential that resulted when divine cunning merged with primordial giant essence, creating beings whose very existence would challenge the foundations of the ordered cosmos. Fenrir emerged from his mother's womb as a wolf cub, whose appearance initially suggested nothing more threatening than an unusually large predator. His fur displayed the dark grey coloration typical of northern wolves, marked with subtle patterns that seemed to shift and flow like shadows cast by moving clouds. His eyes held an intelligence that exceeded that of ordinary animals, gleaming with awareness that suggested conscious thought processes rather than mere instinctual responses. Even as a newborn, his size surpassed that of adult wolves found in other realms, while his growth rate quickly became apparent as he increased in mass and height with each passing day. The young wolf's development proceeded at an alarming pace that defied all natural laws governing mammalian maturation. Within weeks of his birth, Fenrir had achieved the size of a large hunting hound, his muscles developing the definition and power that would eventually allow him to challenge even the strongest gods in physical combat. His appetite proved equally extraordinary, requiring quantities of meat that strained Angrboda's ability to provide adequate nourishment. The giantess found herself hunting constantly to satisfy her son's needs, bringing down creatures that would normally sustain an entire giant family for days, only to watch Fenrir consume them in single meals. The wolf's intelligence manifested through behaviours that distinguished him from ordinary predators in ways that became increasingly obvious as he matured. Fenrir demonstrated the ability to understand complex speech in multiple languages, responding appropriately to instructions and participating in conversations through body language and carefully modulated vocalizations. His problem-solving capabilities exceeded those of many giants, as he devised increasingly sophisticated methods for obtaining food, escaping confinement, and manipulating his environment to serve his needs. These intellectual gifts combined with his growing physical power to create a being whose potential threatened the stability of any community that attempted to contain him. The gods' initial attempts to manage the Fenrir situation reflected their recognition of the wolf's dangerous potential, combined with their reluctance to take drastic action against what appeared to be merely an unusually large and intelligent animal. They invited the young wolf to Asgard under the pretense of friendship, hoping that exposure to divine civilization might moderate his wild nature while allowing them to monitor his development more closely. This decision demonstrated both their underestimation of Fenrir's true nature and their confidence in their ability to control situations that might arise from his presence in their realm. Fenrir's residence in Asgard created tensions that increased proportionally with his continued growth. And developing awareness of his own power, the wolf's size soon exceeded that of horses, requiring specially constructed accommodations that could contain his massive frame without restricting his movements to the point of causing psychological distress. His feeding requirements strained the gods' resources, as even their abundant supplies proved inadequate to satisfy his ever-increasing appetite. More troubling still was his growing awareness of the fear and suspicion his presence generated among his divine hosts, emotions that he perceived with the keen sensitivity of a predator evolved to read the intentions of potential threats. The prophetic warnings delivered by various seers regarding Fenrir's ultimate destiny created additional pressure on the gods to find a permanent solution to the problem his existence represented. These prophecies consistently identified the wolf as Odin's killer during the final battles of Ragnarok, describing in vivid detail how Fenrir would devour the All-Father, despite all attempts to prevent this outcome. The specificity and consistency of these predictions convinced even skeptical gods that action must be taken to prevent the prophesied catastrophe, though the nature of that action remained a subject of intense debate among the divine leadership. The decision to bind Fenrir reflected the gods' conclusion that neither exile nor execution would provide adequate protection against the prophesied threat. Exile would merely delay the problem while allowing the wolf to continue growing and developing his powers in an unmonitored environment, while execution might trigger the very chain of events the gods sought to prevent by creating martyrdom that could inspire giant retaliation. Binding offered the possibility of neutralizing the threat while maintaining some pretense of honorable treatment, though the practical challenges of restraining a being of Fenrir's size and strength required innovative solutions that pushed divine craftsmanship to its limits. The first two chains created to bind Fenrir demonstrated both the wolf's incredible strength and the god's initial underestimation of the measures necessary to contain him. Lading, the first chain, appeared capable of restraining any ordinary creature through its massive iron links and sophisticated locking mechanisms. Fenrir's casual destruction of this restraint revealed that his strength had already exceeded the parameters the gods had used in their calculations, while his willingness to cooperate with the binding attempt showed that he had not yet recognized the true nature of their intentions. Dromi, the second chain, incorporated improvements based on the lessons learned from Lading's failure, featuring enhanced materials and construction techniques that doubled its strength relative to the first attempt. The gods' confidence in this improved restraint proved equally misplaced, as Fenrir shattered Dromi with even less effort than he had expended on its predecessor. The ease with which he destroyed both chains convinced the divine leadership that conventional methods would prove inadequate for their purposes, forcing them to seek assistance from sources beyond their normal capabilities. The creation of Gleipnir required the gods to commission work from the dwarven craftsmen of Svartalfheim, whose magical smithing techniques could produce restraints that operated according to principles beyond normal metallurgy. The dwarves' approach to the binding problem involved the incorporation of materials that existed partially outside normal reality, creating a chain whose strength derived from conceptual rather than physical sources. The resulting restraint appeared deceptively fragile, resembling a silk ribbon more than a chain capable of holding the most dangerous predator in the 9 worlds. The materials incorporated into Gleipnir's construction included elements that could only be obtained through magical processes that bordered on the impossible. The sound of a cat's footfall, the breath of a fish, the beard of a woman, the roots of a mountain, the sinews of a bear, and the spittle of a bird. Each component represented something that existed in potential rather than actuality, creating a binding that drew its strength from the power of paradox itself. The dwarven smith's ability to forge these impossible materials into a functional restraint demonstrated magical capabilities that exceeded even divine understanding. Fenrir's suspicion regarding Gleipnir reflected his growing awareness of the gods' true intentions and his recognition that their latest binding attempt involved principles beyond his previous experience. The wolf's demand that one of the gods place a hand in his mouth as surety against treachery revealed both his intelligence and his understanding of the leverage such a gesture would provide. His specification that the volunteer must be someone whose word carried weight among the divine community demonstrated his sophisticated grasp of Aesir politics and hierarchy. Tyr's decision to volunteer for this dangerous role reflected both his personal courage and his recognition of the cosmic necessity that Fenrir's binding represented. The god of war and justice understood that his sacrifice might be required to prevent the greater catastrophe that the wolf's continued freedom would eventually produce. His willingness to place his sword hand between Fenrir's jaws while knowing that the wolf's bite could sever it completely demonstrated the kind of heroic commitment that defined the best aspects of divine character. The successful binding of Fenrir with Gleipnir marked a turning point in the cosmic balance between order and chaos, as the gods had successfully neutralized one of the primary threats to their continued existence. However, this victory came at the cost of Tyr's hand and, more significantly, the transformation of a potentially neutral force into an implacably hostile enemy. Fenrir's realization that he had been deceived and permanently imprisoned created a hatred toward the gods that would persist until Ragnarok, ensuring that his prophesied role as Odin's destroyer would be motivated by personal vengeance as well as cosmic necessity. The wolf's imprisonment on the island of Lyngvi, secured by the chain Gleipnir and anchored by the stone Gjol, created a situation that satisfied the gods' immediate security needs while establishing the conditions that would guarantee their ultimate destruction. Fenrir's continued growth and increasing rage during his captivity ensured that when he finally broke free during the preliminary events of Ragnarok, his power and hatred would have reached levels that made his victory over Odin inevitable. The gods' success in preventing their immediate destruction had merely postponed their doom while making it more certain and terrible. Jormungandr's birth as a serpent whose ultimate size would allow him to encircle the entire world of Midgard represented a different category of threat than that posed by his wolf brother. Where Fenrir's danger lay primarily in his physical strength and prophesied role as Odin's killer, the world's serpent embodied a more fundamental challenge to the cosmic order through his potential to disrupt the physical structure of the world itself. His presence in the oceans that surrounded Midgard created a constant reminder of the chaotic forces that lurked beneath the surface of the ordered world, while his eventual role in poisoning the sky during Ragnarok would make him instrumental in the destruction of all life. The young serpent's early development occurred primarily through length rather than mass, allowing him to achieve enormous size without requiring the massive food intake that characterized Fenrir's growth. His scales displayed an iridescent quality that shifted between dark green and black, depending on the angle of observation, and the quality of available light. His eyes possessed the cold intelligence of reptilian predators, while his forked tongue constantly tested the air for chemical information about his environment. Even as a juvenile, his venom glands produced toxins whose potency exceeded those of ordinary snakes by factors that defied measurement. The gods' decision to cast Jormungandr into the ocean surrounding Midgard reflected their recognition that his continued presence in any populated area would create unacceptable risks for the inhabitants. The serpent's venom could contaminate water supplies over vast areas, while his eventual size would make him capable of destroying entire settlements through his movements alone. The ocean provided an environment where he could continue growing without immediate threat to established civilizations, though this solution merely postponed the problems his existence would eventually create. Jormungandr's adaptation to marine life proceeded with remarkable speed, as his serpentine form proved ideally suited to underwater locomotion, and his hunting instincts quickly identified the sea creatures that would sustain him during his growth to world-encircling proportions. His presence in the oceans created changes in marine ecosystems that affected fishing yields and shipping routes, while his movements generated underwater currents that influenced weather patterns throughout the inhabited regions of Midgard. These environmental effects served as constant reminders of his presence, even when the serpent himself remained hidden in the deepest ocean trenches. The world serpent's encounters with Thor during the gods' fishing expeditions demonstrated both his incredible size and the mutual hostility that characterized their relationship. These confrontations reveal that Jormungandr had achieved sufficient size to challenge even the thunder god in direct combat, while his venom had reached potency levels that could prove fatal even to divine opponents. The serpent's ability to create massive waves and underwater disturbances through his movements showed that his presence in the oceans had become a significant factor in maritime safety and coastal stability. The prophetic significance of Jormungandr's role during Ragnarok centered on his emergence from the ocean to join the forces of chaos in their final assault on the ordered world. His movement onto land would create tidal waves that would devastate coastal regions, while his breath would poison the atmosphere and make the air itself lethal to most forms of life. The mutual destruction prophesied for his final battle with Thor would eliminate two of the most powerful forces in the cosmic conflict, with the thunder god succumbing to the serpent's venom, even as Mjolnir delivered the killing blow that would end the world serpent's existence. Hel's birth as a being whose body displayed both living and dead characteristics created the most visually disturbing of Angrboda's three children, though her ultimate role in cosmic events would prove less directly destructive than those of her brothers. Her appearance combined normal flesh with areas of decay and skeletal exposure, creating a visual effect that disturbed even giants accustomed to unusual physical manifestations. Her living side displayed the pale beauty characteristic of her giant heritage, while her dead side revealed the corruption and decay that awaited all mortal flesh. This dual nature made her uniquely qualified to serve as ruler of the dishonoured dead, those who died of sickness, old age, or other unheroic circumstances. The young Hel's emotional development proceeded according to patterns that reflected her future responsibilities as judge and ruler of deceased souls. She demonstrated an early understanding of concepts related to death and judgment that exceeded her apparent age, while her interactions with living beings showed the emotional detachment necessary for making fair decisions about souls whose life experiences spanned the full range of moral behaviour. Her dual nature allowed her to empathise with both the living and the dead, while maintaining the objectivity required for effective governance of her future realm. The gods' decision to assign Hel dominion over the realm of the dishonoured dead reflected both their recognition of her unique qualifications for this role and their desire to remove her from situations where her disturbing appearance might create social problems. Her appointment to rule over Helheim provided a solution that utilised her abilities constructively, while ensuring that she would be occupied with responsibilities that served cosmic order rather than threatening it. This arrangement demonstrated the god's occasional ability to find positive applications for potentially dangerous forces when creative solutions could be devised. Hel's establishment of her realm's governance structures required her to develop administrative systems capable of managing vast populations of deceased individuals from multiple species and realms. Her court included assistants and advisors whose own relationships with death qualified them to help evaluate the complex cases that came before her tribunal. The physical layout of her hall accommodated both the living visitors who occasionally required her services and the permanent dead residents who made up the majority of her subjects. The goddess of the dead's most significant demonstration of her power occurred when the gods requested Baldur's release following his death from Loki's machinations. Her demand that all things in creation weep for the beloved god before she would release him from death revealed both her understanding of cosmic justice and her recognition of the political implications involved in such a decision. The failure of this test, caused by a single giantess who refused to weep, provided Hel with the justification she needed to retain Baldur in her realm, while maintaining her reputation for fair dealing. The broader significance of Loki's 3 children extended beyond their individual roles to encompass their collective representation of the forces that would ultimately destroy the current cosmic order. Fenrir embodied the violence that would consume the gods themselves, Jormungandr represented the poison that would corrupt the physical world, and Hel controlled the realm where the dead would outnumber the living as the final catastrophe approached. Their existence served as constant reminders that the ordered cosmos contained within itself the seeds of its own destruction. Among the other monstrous offspring that emerged from the chaotic unions between giants and various cosmic forces, Sleipnir represented a more positive example of how such unusual births could serve beneficial purposes within the cosmic order. The 8-legged horse born from Loki's union with the giant builder's stallion, Svadilfari, possessed speed and endurance that exceeded those of ordinary horses by enormous margins. His ability to travel between the 9 worlds made him invaluable to Odin as a mount capable of carrying the All-Father on his journeys throughout the cosmic tree Yggdrasil. Sleipnir's physical appearance combined the basic structure of a horse with the additional limbs that gave him his supernatural locomotion capabilities. His 8 legs moved in coordinated patterns that allowed him to achieve speeds impossible for 4-legged creatures, while his enhanced musculature provided the strength necessary to carry riders across the vast distances that separated different realms. His coat displayed the grey coloration that marked his relationship to Loki, while his eyes held intelligence that suggested awareness of his unique status within the cosmic hierarchy. The horse's ability to traverse the boundaries between worlds required magical capabilities that operated according to principles beyond normal transportation methods. Sleipnir could gallop across the surface of water as easily as solid ground, while his hooves could find purchase on insubstantial surfaces like clouds or mist when necessary. His most remarkable ability involved his capacity to travel along the branches and roots of Yggdrasil itself, navigating the world tree's complex structure to reach destinations that would otherwise require lengthy journeys through conventional space. The wolf's skull and hati represented a different category of giant-born monsters, creatures whose destiny involved the pursuit and eventual consumption of the sun and moon during the events leading to Ragnarok. These enormous wolves had been born in the iron forests of Jarnvidr, where their size and ferocity had been shaped by the harsh environment and the chaotic forces that permeated their birthplace. Their names reflected their cosmic roles, with skull meaning mockery and hati meaning hate, titles that captured their relationship to the celestial bodies they were destined to devour. Skull's pursuit of the sun created the daily cycle of light and darkness that governed the passage of time throughout the inhabited worlds. His constant chase across the sky kept the sun moving at the proper speed to maintain regular day-night cycles, while his occasional near captures created the eclipses that served as omens of coming disasters. The wolf's size exceeded that of normal predators by factors that allowed him to threaten celestial bodies, while his speed matched that necessary to keep pace with the sun's movement across the heavens. Hati's parallel pursuit of the moon created the lunar cycles that influenced tides, agricultural timing, and various magical practices throughout the 9 worlds. His hunting pattern created the phases of the moon as his proximity waxed and waned according to his success in closing the distance with his prey. The wolf's nocturnal nature made him particularly dangerous during the darkest nights, when his approach to the moon created the conditions that allowed various forms of dark magic to operate with enhanced effectiveness. The prophesied success of both wolves during Ragnarok would eliminate the sources of light that made life possible in the current cosmic order, creating the darkness that would precede the final destruction of the world. Their consumption of the sun and moon would mark one of the crucial events in the sequence leading to cosmic collapse, demonstrating how even the most fundamental aspects of reality remained vulnerable to the chaotic forces that the giants represented. The darkness that would follow their victory would create conditions that favoured the forces of destruction, while handicapping those who sought to preserve the existing order. The complex web of relationships between gods and giants extended far beyond the simple narrative of eternal conflict that dominated most interactions between the two races. Beneath the surface of their cosmic opposition lay intricate patterns of alliance, marriage, and betrayal that revealed the fundamental interconnectedness of divine and giant bloodlines. These relationships created bonds that transcended racial boundaries, while simultaneously generating tensions that would ultimately contribute to the destruction of the ordered cosmos. The gods' willingness to form intimate connections with Giantkind demonstrated their recognition that certain aspects of existence required cooperation with the very forces they sought to control, even as these alliances carried within them the seeds of future catastrophe. Odin's relationship with Jord, the personification of Earth itself, represented one of the most significant unions between divine and giant essence in Norse cosmology. Jord's nature as both giantess and earth goddess made her an essential partner for the All-Father, whose role as ruler of the gods required him to maintain connections with the fundamental forces that sustained the physical world. Her giant heritage linked her directly to the primordial chaos from which all existence had emerged, while her function as Earth embodied the stable foundation upon which the ordered cosmos had been built. This dual nature made her uniquely qualified to bear a child who would serve as the primary defender of divine civilization against the chaotic forces that constantly threatened its existence. The union between Odin and Jord occurred during the early ages of the world, when the boundaries between divine and giant territories remained more fluid than they would become in later times. Their relationship developed through Odin's recognition that his cosmic responsibilities required him to understand and work with the Earth's power rather than simply commanding it from a distance. Jord's willingness to enter into this alliance reflected her own understanding that the survival of the Earth itself depended upon maintaining some degree of cooperation with the divine forces that governed the cosmic order. Their son Thor inherited characteristics from both parents that made him ideally suited for his role as defender of the gods and protector of civilized order. From his divine father, he received the authority and magical capabilities necessary to wield cosmic forces in defense of Asgard and its allies. From his giant mother, he inherited the physical strength and connection to earthly power that allowed him to channel lightning and thunder while maintaining the endurance necessary for prolonged battles against the most formidable opponents. This combination of divine authority and giant strength created a being whose capabilities exceeded those of purely divine or purely giant individuals. Thor's mixed heritage created internal tensions that influenced his approach to dealing with giant threats throughout his existence. His maternal connection to Giantkind occasionally generated moments of hesitation or regret when his duties required him to kill giants who might be distant relatives through his mother's bloodline. However, his loyalty to his divine father and his commitment to protecting the ordered world typically overcame these emotional complications, allowing him to fulfill his role as giant slayer, despite the personal costs such actions sometimes entailed. The relationship between Thor and his giant mother remained complex throughout his life, as Jord's nature as Earth meant that his battles against giants were often fought upon her very body. Each thunderbolt he hurled and every earthquake generated by his hammer's impact affected the Earth directly, creating a situation where his defensive actions caused his mother to experience the violence he employed against her giant relatives. This dynamic added layers of complexity to Thor's role that distinguished him from other gods whose family relationships did not create such direct conflicts of interest. Thor's own liaison with the giantess Jarnsaxa produced offspring that carried forward the mixing of divine and giant bloodlines into subsequent generations. Jarnsaxa's name, meaning iron knife, reflected her connection to the metallic forces that characterized certain regions of Jotunheim, while her relationship with the Thunder God demonstrated that even the most dedicated giant slayer could form intimate connections with members of the race he was sworn to combat. Their union occurred during one of Thor's expeditions into giant territory, and circumstances created opportunities for personal relationships to develop, despite the broader conflict between their respective communities. The children born to Thor and Jarnsaxa inherited abilities that combined their father's control over thunder and lightning with their mother's mastery of metallic forces and earth-based magic. These offspring possessed the potential to serve as bridges between divine and giant communities, though their ultimate loyalties would depend upon the treatment they received from both sides during their formative years. Their existence created additional complications for Thor's role as giant slayer, as his own children shared the bloodline of the enemies he was sworn to destroy. Jarnsaxa's status as both giantess and mother of divine children placed her in a unique position within giant society, as her relationship with Thor provided her with protection from divine aggression, while her giant heritage maintained her connections to her own people. This dual loyalty created opportunities for her to serve as an intermediary during negotiations between gods and giants, though such diplomatic roles remained limited by the fundamental hostility that characterized most interactions between the races. Her influence over her children's development would prove crucial in determining whether they would serve as forces for reconciliation or sources of additional conflict. The marriage between Njordr and Skadi represented perhaps the most elaborate attempt at creating lasting peace between gods and giants through matrimonial alliance. This union emerged from the complex negotiations that followed the gods' killing of Skadi's father Thjazi, whose death had created a blood debt that threatened to escalate into open warfare between the Aesir and the powerful giant clans of the northern mountains. Skadi's demand for compensation revealed both her understanding of her own value as a potential bride and her recognition that marriage to a god might provide better long-term security than simple monetary payment for her father's death. Thjazi's death had occurred during his pursuit of the goddess Idun and her magical apples of youth, a theft that had been orchestrated through Loki's manipulation, but which had placed the giant in direct opposition to divine interests. The circumstances of his killing created a legitimate grievance that Skadi was entitled to pursue through the traditional channels of justice and compensation. Her arrival in Asgard to demand satisfaction for her father's death demonstrated both her courage and her confidence in her ability to negotiate with the gods from a position of strength. The gods' decision to offer marriage as compensation for Thjazi's death reflected their recognition that Skadi's beauty and abilities made her a valuable potential ally, while her giant heritage provided opportunities for establishing connections with other giant clans who might be persuaded to adopt more peaceful approaches to divine relations. The marriage arrangement also served their strategic interests by removing a potentially dangerous enemy from the field, while gaining a powerful ally whose knowledge of giant territories and capabilities could prove useful in future conflicts. Skadi's acceptance of the marriage proposal came with conditions that revealed her practical understanding of the political implications involved in such a union. Her demand that the gods make her laugh demonstrated her awareness that successful marriage required emotional compatibility as well as political advantage, while her insistence on choosing her husband based solely on the appearance of feet showed her determination to maintain some degree of control over her personal destiny even within the constraints of an arranged marriage. The foot selection process that led to Skadi's choice of Njordr instead of Balder revealed both her practical approach to marriage and the limitations of making important decisions based on incomplete information. Her assumption that the most attractive feet would belong to the most desirable husband proved incorrect, as Njordr's beautiful feet reflected his connection to the sea rather than the physical attractiveness she had expected to find in Balder. This mistake would create ongoing complications in their relationship, as her attraction to Balder persisted even after her marriage to the sea god. The fundamental incompatibility between Njordr and Skadi became apparent almost immediately after their wedding, as their preferred living environments proved mutually exclusive. Njordr's connection to the sea required him to spend significant time near coastal waters, where the sound of waves and the salt air provided the environmental conditions necessary for his well-being and the effective exercise of his divine powers. Skadi's mountain heritage made her most comfortable in high-altitude environments, where snow and ice created the cold conditions that enhanced her own abilities while providing the familiar surroundings that reminded her of her childhood home. Their attempt to resolve this incompatibility through a time-sharing arrangement demonstrated both their commitment to making their marriage work and the practical difficulties involved in bridging such fundamental differences in nature and preference. The agreement to spend 9 days in Skadi's mountain hall, followed by 9 days in Njordr's coastal residence, created a compromise that satisfied neither party completely while preventing either from enjoying the consistent environmental conditions they required for optimal comfort and effectiveness. Njordr's discomfort in the mountain environment manifested through his inability to sleep properly due to the howling of wolves that replaced the familiar sound of ocean waves he was accustomed to hearing during his rest periods. The cold mountain air affected his health and magical abilities, while the absence of salt water limited his access to the oceanic forces that form the foundation of his divine power. His complaints about these conditions revealed not mere personal preference but genuine physical and magical needs that could not be satisfied in Skadi's preferred environment. Skadi's parallel difficulties during her stays in Njordr's coastal domain centered on her inability to tolerate the constant noise of seabirds and the humid air that characterized maritime environments. The warmth of the coastal climate weakened her connection to the ice-based magic that formed the core of her abilities, while the flat terrain and lack of snow-covered peaks created psychological discomfort that affected her emotional well-being. Her complaints about these conditions reflected similar needs for specific environmental conditions that could not be met in her husband's preferred location. The eventual failure of their marriage arrangement demonstrated the limitations of political alliances based on matrimonial unions when the partners possessed fundamentally incompatible natures. Their separation occurred through mutual agreement rather than bitter conflict, as both parties recognized that their differences could not be reconciled through compromise or adaptation. This amicable dissolution preserved the political benefits of their alliance while acknowledging the reality that successful marriage required more than good intentions and political necessity. The long-term consequences of the Njordr-Skadi marriage influenced divine policy regarding future matrimonial alliances with Giantkind. The gods' recognition that environmental and temperamental compatibility played crucial roles in successful relationships led to more careful consideration of such factors in subsequent negotiations. The experience also demonstrated that giant divine marriages could serve political purposes even when they failed as personal relationships, as the alliance between the races persisted despite the couple's eventual separation. Skadi's subsequent relationships and activities within both divine and giant communities illustrated her unique position as a bridge figure between the two races. Her residence in Thrymheimer provided a neutral meeting ground where gods and giants could interact without the usual tensions that characterise such encounters. While her knowledge of both cultures made her valuable as a mediator during disputes that required understanding of both divine and giant perspectives, her continued presence in the cosmic order served as a reminder that cooperation between the races remained possible despite their fundamental differences. The role of giants as sources of wisdom and magical knowledge for the gods represented another crucial aspect of their complex relationship. Despite their opposition to divine authority, many giants possessed understanding of cosmic forces and magical principles that exceeded divine knowledge in specific areas. This superior understanding created situations where gods found themselves dependent upon giant wisdom to achieve their objectives, leading to relationships that combined elements of alliance, negotiation, and mutual exploitation. Mimir's position as the wisest of all beings in the Nine Worlds made him an invaluable source of counsel for Odin, whose pursuit of knowledge and wisdom drove him to seek information from any source that could enhance his understanding of cosmic forces and future events. The giant's residence beside the well that bore his name provided him with access to the waters of wisdom that flowed from one of Yggdrasil's roots, creating a situation where divine access to this crucial resource required giant cooperation and consent. The decapitation of Mimir during the war between the Aesir and Vanir created a crisis that threatened to eliminate one of the most important sources of wisdom in the cosmos. Odin's decision to preserve the giant's head through magical means demonstrated both his recognition of Mimir's irreplaceable value and his willingness to employ necromantic techniques that violated normal divine standards when circumstances required such extreme measures. The success of this preservation created a unique situation where a dead giant continued to serve as advisor to the living gods. The preserved head of Mimir retained not only the giant's vast knowledge and wisdom, but also his ability to perceive events occurring throughout the Nine Worlds and to understand the cosmic forces that governed the development of future events. His counsel proved crucial to Odin's decision-making processes throughout the ages leading to Ragnarok, providing information that allowed the All-Father to prepare for the coming destruction while understanding the limitations that prevented him from avoiding his prophesied fate. The relationship between Odin and Mimir's head illustrated the complex dynamics that could develop when gods became dependent upon giant wisdom for their survival and success. The All-Father's regular consultations with the preserved head created a situation where divine policy was influenced by giant perspectives and understanding, even though Mimir's death had removed him from active participation in giant politics and society. This arrangement demonstrated that the value of giant wisdom could transcend the normal boundaries of life and death when properly preserved and maintained. The acquisition of the mead of poetry from giant hands represented another crucial example of divine dependence upon giant resources for achieving their cultural and political objectives. The theft of this magical substance from the giant Surtur required elaborate planning and deception that tested Odin's abilities as a shape-changer and infiltrator, while the successful completion of this mission provided the gods with cultural tools that enhanced their influence throughout the inhabited worlds. Surtur's possession of the mead of poetry had resulted from his acquisition of the substance from the dwarves, who had created it using the blood of Kvasir, the wisest being ever born from the union of divine essences. The giant's recognition of the mead's value led him to store it in the most secure location available, deep within a mountain where his daughter Gunnlod served as its guardian. This arrangement created a situation where divine access to the mead required not only infiltration of giant territory, but also the seduction of a giantess whose loyalty to her father created additional complications for any theft attempt. Odin's transformation into the form of a snake to penetrate the mountain's defences demonstrated the lengths to which he was willing to go to acquire the mead of poetry, while his subsequent seduction of Gunnlod revealed his willingness to exploit personal relationships to achieve his objectives. The success of this deception allowed him to consume the entire store of mead before escaping in eagle form, though the pursuit by Suttungr in similar avian shape created additional dangers that nearly prevented the successful completion of his mission. The cultural impact of the mead of poetry throughout the Nine Worlds demonstrated the transformative power of this stolen substance, as its influence spread through divine distribution to worthy poets and storytellers among gods, giants and men. The enhancement of creative abilities that resulted from exposure to the mead created cultural renaissance that elevated the artistic achievements of all races while providing the gods with soft power that complemented their military and magical capabilities. Loki's unique position as both god and giant created the most complex example of divided loyalty and conflicted identity within the cosmic order. His giant parentage linked him directly to the chaotic forces that the gods sought to control, while his adoption into the Aesir and his blood brotherhood with Odin created obligations and loyalties that often conflicted with his racial heritage. This dual nature made him simultaneously one of the most valuable assets and most dangerous threats within the divine community, as his abilities and knowledge could serve either order or chaos, depending upon his personal inclinations and the treatment he received from his divine associates. Loki's marriage to Sigyn, a goddess whose loyalty and devotion would prove crucial during his eventual punishment, demonstrated his ability to form genuine emotional connections within the divine community despite his giant heritage. Sigyn's acceptance of Loki despite his mixed nature and questionable reputation illustrated the possibility for individual relationships to transcend racial boundaries when based on genuine affection rather than political necessity. Their marriage produced children who inherited their father's shape-changing abilities, while maintaining loyalty to the divine community that had accepted their parents. The relationship between Loki and Angrboda represented a different aspect of his complex identity, as his union with the giantess produced offspring whose monstrous natures embodied the chaotic potential that resulted from the combination of divine cunning and primordial giant essence. This relationship occurred during periods when Loki's loyalty to the gods had been strained by their treatment of him, leading him to seek companionship among his giant relatives who understood and accepted his dual nature without demanding the conformity to divine standards that his Aesir associates expected. The children born from Loki's union with Angrboda, Fenrir, Jormungandr, and Hel, represented the ultimate consequences of uncontrolled mixing between divine and giant bloodlines. Their monstrous forms and dangerous capabilities forced the gods to confront the reality that their acceptance of Loki had introduced chaotic elements into their community that could not be eliminated without destroying the benefits his presence provided. The gods' treatment of these children would prove crucial in determining Loki's ultimate loyalty during the cosmic crisis that would lead to Ragnarok. Loki's role as mediator and translator between divine and giant communities emerged from his unique understanding of both cultures and his ability to navigate the complex social and political structures that governed each race. His shape-changing abilities allowed him to assume forms appropriate for different environments and social situations, while his intelligence and quick wit enabled him to find solutions to problems that required understanding of both divine order and giant chaos. These capabilities made him invaluable during negotiations and crises that required bridging the gap between the two races. The gradual deterioration of Loki's relationship with the gods reflected the inherent instability of his position as a bridge figure between fundamentally opposed forces. His increasing resentment of divine treatment, combined with his growing awareness that his giant heritage made him permanently suspect within the Aesir community, created conditions that would eventually drive him to open rebellion against his adopted family. This transformation from ally to enemy illustrated the dangers inherent in attempting to maintain dual loyalties when the competing sides possessed irreconcilable differences. The binding of Loki following his role in Baldur's death represented the final breakdown of the complex relationship between the Shape-Changer and his divine associates. The gods' decision to torture their former ally through the dripping of serpent venom created a situation that guaranteed his eternal enmity while eliminating any possibility of reconciliation or redemption. This punishment ensured that when Ragnarok arrived, Loki would serve as one of the primary leaders of the forces arrayed against divine order, bringing his intimate knowledge of divine weaknesses and strategies to bear against his former friends and family. The broader pattern of divine-giant relationships revealed fundamental tensions within the cosmic order that made ultimate reconciliation between the races impossible despite their mutual dependence and interconnected bloodlines. The gods' need for giant wisdom, strength, and magical capabilities created situations where cooperation was necessary for their survival and success, while their commitment to maintaining ordered civilization made them natural enemies of the chaotic forces that giants represented. This paradox ensured that even the most successful alliances between gods and giants remained temporary arrangements that would eventually collapse under the weight of their fundamental incompatibility. The cosmic balance established after Ymir's death and the creation of the ordered world could never remain static, for the fundamental opposition between divine structure and giant chaos demanded constant resolution through conflict. What emerged was not a single war, with clear beginning and end, but an ongoing cycle of violence that would persist throughout the ages until Ragnarok itself. This perpetual struggle manifested most visibly through Thor's countless expeditions into Jotunheim, where his hammer Mjolnir served as both weapon and symbol of divine authority over the chaotic forces that giants represented. Thor's campaigns against the giants followed patterns that reflected both strategic necessity and personal compulsion. The thunder god's mixed heritage, born of divine father and giant mother, created internal tensions that found release only through combat against his maternal relatives. His expeditions typically began when reports reached Asgard of giant activities that threatened the stability of the ordered world, raids against human settlements, attempts to extend winter conditions beyond their natural boundaries, or collaborative efforts to construct weapons capable of challenging divine supremacy. Thor's response invariably involved immediate departure for Jotunheim, often accompanied by minimal planning and relying primarily on his overwhelming physical capabilities to resolve whatever threats he encountered. The Thunder God's approach to giant warfare emphasized direct confrontation over subtle strategy. His chariot, drawn by the goats Tangrisnir and Tangjosta, announced his arrival through the thunder of wheels and hooves that could be heard across vast distances. This dramatic entrance served multiple purposes. It warned giants of his approach, allowing those who preferred to avoid conflict the opportunity to flee, while simultaneously demonstrating his confidence in his ability to overcome any opposition he might encounter. The psychological impact of Thor's thunderous arrival often proved as effective as his hammer in resolving conflicts, as many giants chose retreat over facing the thunder god in direct combat. Mjolnir's role in these conflicts extended beyond its function as a weapon to encompass its symbolic significance as the ultimate expression of divine power over chaotic forces. The hammer's ability to never miss its target represented the inevitability of divine justice, while its automatic return to Thor's hand demonstrated the unbreakable connection between the thunder god and his primary tool of enforcement. Each blow struck with Mjolnir sent lightning crackling across the sky, creating visual displays that reminded all observers of the cosmic forces aligned against giant ambitions. The giants' responses to Thor's expeditions reveal the diversity of approaches that characterize their resistance to divine authority. Some giant clans chose direct confrontation, gathering their strongest warriors and most powerful magic users to face the thunder god in open battle. These encounters typically resulted in devastating defeats for the giants, as even their most formidable champions rarely possessed the combination of strength, magical protection, and combat experience necessary to match Thor in single combat. However, the giants' willingness to face certain death rather than submit to divine authority demonstrated the depth of their commitment to their chaotic principles. Other giant communities adopted more subtle strategies, using illusion, deception, and environmental manipulation to create challenges that Thor's straightforward approach could not easily overcome. These tactics proved more successful in delaying or frustrating the Thunder God's missions, though they rarely achieved lasting victories against his determination and growing experience with giant trickery. The most sophisticated giant leaders recognized that direct victory over Thor was unlikely, instead focusing on strategies that would exhaust his resources, waste his time, or force him to make mistakes that could be exploited by future opponents. The cumulative effect of Thor's countless expeditions created a state of perpetual warfare that influenced the development of both divine and giant civilizations. The gods' confidence in their ability to suppress giant threats through Thor's interventions sometimes led to complacency in their defensive preparations, while the giants' constant exposure to divine military pressure forced them to develop increasingly sophisticated methods of resistance and survival. This evolutionary arms race ensured that each side's capabilities continued to advance throughout the cosmic ages, setting the stage for the ultimate confrontation that would occur during Ragnarok. The theft of Idun and her apples of youth by the giant Thjazi represented one of the most successful giant operations against divine interests, demonstrating both the vulnerability of the gods to well-planned attacks and the catastrophic consequences that could result from even temporary disruption of the cosmic order. Idun's role as keeper of the apples that maintained divine youth made her one of the most crucial figures in Asgard, though her importance was often taken for granted by gods who had become accustomed to the eternal youth her magical fruit provided. Thjazi's plan to acquire Idun required careful observation of divine routines and identification of opportunities when the goddess might be vulnerable to abduction. His shape-changing abilities allowed him to assume eagle form for reconnaissance missions that revealed the patterns of her daily activities and the security measures that protected her. The giant's patience in developing his plan over extended periods demonstrated the sophisticated planning capabilities that the most dangerous giants could employ when pursuing objectives that required subtlety rather than brute force. The execution of Thjazi's abduction plan exploited Loki's susceptible nature and his tendency to make impulsive decisions when faced with immediate threats. The giant's capture of Loki during the Shape-Changer's travels provided the leverage necessary to coerce divine cooperation with his scheme. Loki's agreement to bring Idun outside Asgard's protective barriers reflected both his fear of Thjazi's power and his characteristic willingness to sacrifice others' welfare to preserve his own safety. Loki's deception of Idun required him to exploit her trusting nature and her genuine interest in her botanical responsibilities. His story about discovering apples in the forest that might rival her own magical fruit appealed to her professional curiosity while providing a plausible explanation for why she should venture outside Asgard's defences, carrying her precious apples for comparison purposes. The success of this deception demonstrated both Loki's skill as a manipulator and Idun's tragic naivety about the dangers that surrounded divine civilization. Thjazi's successful abduction of Idun created immediate consequences that revealed the extent of divine dependence upon her magical apples. The gods' aging process began within days of her disappearance, as their bodies started showing signs of the temporal decay that the apples had previously prevented. Grey hair appeared in golden locks, wrinkles developed on smooth faces, and the physical vigour that had characterised divine youth began to diminish at alarming rates. These changes affected not only the gods' appearance, but also their magical capabilities, as the weakening of their physical forms reduced their ability to channel and control cosmic forces. The psychological impact of aging proved as devastating as the physical changes, as gods who had existed for countless ages without experiencing temporal decay found themselves confronting their own mortality for the first time. The realization that their eternal youth had depended upon a resource that could be stolen or destroyed challenged their fundamental assumptions about their nature and destiny. Some gods fell into despair, while others became obsessed with finding alternative sources of youth or methods of reversing the aging process that had begun to affect them. The gods' investigation into Idun's disappearance quickly focused on Loki, whose absence during the period of her abduction and his suspicious behaviour upon returning to Asgard aroused immediate suspicion. The Shape-Changer's attempts to deflect attention from his role in the goddess's disappearance proved ineffective against divine interrogation techniques that could detect deception and extract truth from unwilling subjects. His eventual confession revealed not only his cooperation with Thjazi, but also the coercive circumstances that had led to his betrayal of Idun's trust. The gods demand that Loki rectify the situation by rescuing Idun from Thjazi's stronghold, place the Shape-Changer in a position where his survival depended upon his ability to overcome the very giant whose power had originally coerced his cooperation. This reversal of circumstances forced Loki to employ his most sophisticated magical abilities and strategic thinking to devise a rescue plan that could succeed against a giant who had already demonstrated his superiority in previous encounters. Loki's transformation into falcon form for the rescue mission required magical techniques that pushed his shape-changing abilities to their limits, as the speed and endurance necessary for the journey to Thjazi's mountain stronghold exceeded the normal capabilities of ordinary birds. The magical enhancement of his avian form created temporary abilities that allowed him to cover vast distances while maintaining the stealth necessary to approach the giant's fortress undetected. This transformation demonstrated the extraordinary lengths to which Loki could push his powers when his survival depended upon success. The rescue of Idun from Thjazi's captivity required precise timing and flawless execution, as any delay or mistake would result in the giant's discovery of the escape attempt and the probable death of both Loki and the goddess. Loki's transformation of Idun into Nott form allowed him to carry her during his flight back to Asgard, though this additional burden reduced his speed and made him vulnerable to pursuit by Thjazi in his own eagle form. The chase that followed tested both participants' aerial capabilities while creating a race whose outcome would determine the fate of divine civilization. The pursuit by Thjazi in eagle form created one of the most dramatic aerial conflicts in Norse mythology, as both participants pushed their shape-changed forms beyond normal limits in their desperate flight toward Asgard. Thjazi's larger eagle form provided advantages in raw speed and power, allowing him to gradually close the distance with his fleeing quarry, despite Loki's head start. The giant's determination to recapture his prize drove him to maintain pursuit even as the flight approached Asgard's defensive barriers, where his presence would expose him to retaliation from the assembled gods. The gods' preparation of a fire trap at Asgard's walls demonstrated their understanding that Thjazi's pursuit would bring him within range of their defensive capabilities. The massive bonfire they constructed created a barrier of flame that would prove fatal to anyone attempting to cross it in avian form, while its positioning allowed them to ignite it at precisely the moment when Thjazi's pursuit brought him into the trap. This preparation required careful coordination among multiple gods and precise timing to ensure that the fire would catch the giant without harming Loki and Idun during their escape. Thjazi's death in the flames of the god's trap eliminated one of the most dangerous giants in Jotunheim, while simultaneously creating the blood debt that would lead to Skadi's demands for compensation and her eventual marriage to Njorda. The giant's burning created a spectacular display that served as both celebration of divine victory and warning to other giants about the consequences of challenging divine authority directly. However, the circumstances of his death also demonstrated the gods' willingness to employ deception and ambush tactics when facing opponents whose capabilities exceeded their ability to defeat through direct confrontation. The restoration of Idun and her apples to Asgard immediately began reversing the aging process that had threatened divine civilization. as the gods' consumption of her magical fruit restored their eternal youth and renewed their access to the full extent of their powers. The relief that accompanied this restoration was tempered by recognition of their vulnerability to similar attacks in the future and the need for enhanced security measures to protect such crucial resources from giant interference. The construction of Asgard's protective wall represented the gods' most ambitious attempt to create permanent defences against giant threats, though the project's execution would demonstrate the dangers inherent in employing giant contractors for work that served divine interests. The decision to build such fortifications reflected their recognition that Thor's expeditions, while effective at suppressing immediate threats, could not provide comprehensive protection against the increasingly sophisticated attacks that giant enemies were developing. The unnamed giant who proposed to construct Asgard's wall possessed capabilities that exceeded those of divine craftsmen, offering to complete the project within a time frame that seemed impossible given the scale of the work involved. His confidence in his ability to meet such ambitious deadlines reflected both his mastery of construction techniques unknown to the gods and his access to resources and assistance that would prove crucial to the project's success. The giant's willingness to undertake such an enormous project for the gods suggested either supreme confidence in his abilities or hidden motivations that extended beyond simple commercial interest. The terms negotiated for the wall's construction reveal the giant's understanding of the true value of his services and his willingness to demand compensation that would fundamentally alter the balance of power between gods and giants. His request for Freya as his bride, along with the sun and moon, indicated his awareness that successful completion of the wall would place him in a position to demand virtually any price for his work. These terms also suggested his recognition that the defensive benefits the wall would provide to the gods justified compensation that exceeded normal commercial standards. The gods' acceptance of these terms reflected their desperation for effective defences combined with their confidence that the giant would prove unable to complete the work within the specified time frame. Their assumption that the project's scope exceeded any individual's capabilities, even those of the most skilled giant craftsmen, led them to view the agreement as a risk-free opportunity to obtain partial defensive benefits without paying the full price. This miscalculation would create increasingly serious problems, as the giant's progress exceeded all divine expectations. The giant's supernatural horse, Svadilfari, proved to be the crucial factor that allowed the construction project to proceed at unprecedented speed. The stallion's strength exceeded that of ordinary horses by factors that allowed him to move stone blocks weighing several tons across difficult terrain without apparent strain. His intelligence and work ethic matched his physical capabilities, as he seemed to understand the urgency of the project and worked tirelessly to maintain the pace necessary for meeting the contract's demanding deadline. The partnership between giant and horse demonstrated levels of cooperation between different species that the gods found both impressive and disturbing. Svadilfari's ability to anticipate his master's needs and work independently when necessary suggested intelligence that rivaled that of many giants, while his dedication to the project exceeded what could be expected from mere animal instinct. The efficiency of their collaboration allowed them to accomplish each day's work quotas with time to spare, creating a construction pace that threatened to complete the wall well within the agreed time frame. The gods' growing alarm at the project's rapid progress forced them to confront the possibility that they would indeed be required to surrender Freya, the sun, and the moon as payment for the wall's completion. The loss of these crucial elements would effectively destroy their civilization, even while providing the defensive capabilities they had sought. Freya's importance to divine society extended beyond her individual contributions to encompass her role in maintaining the magical and cultural foundations of Aesir civilization. The sun and moon's removal would eliminate the light sources necessary for life throughout the inhabited worlds, creating conditions that would favour the forces of chaos and darkness. Loki's intervention in the form of Ymir, who distracted Svadilfari, represented the god's decision to employ sabotage and deception to avoid honouring their contractual obligations. The transformation required magical abilities that tested even Loki's considerable shape-changing skills, as creating a form capable of attracting the supernatural stallion's attention required understanding of equine psychology and behaviour that exceeded normal divine knowledge. The success of this deception depended upon Loki's ability to maintain his disguise while leading Svadilfari away from the construction site at the crucial moment when his absence would prevent completion of the wall within the specified time frame. The seduction of Svadilfari created delays that proved sufficient to prevent the giant from completing his work by the agreed deadline, providing the gods with the technical excuse they needed to avoid paying the promised compensation. However, this success came at the cost of Loki's temporary absence from Asgard and his eventual return in a condition that revealed the personal sacrifices his intervention had required. The shape-changer's pregnancy and eventual birth of the eight-legged foal Sleipnir demonstrated the physical and emotional costs that could result from such desperate measures. The giant builder's discovery of the god's deception and his transformation into his true form revealed that their contractor had been a mountain giant whose size and strength exceeded even their most pessimistic estimates. His rage at their betrayal created immediate threats to divine safety that required rapid response to prevent catastrophic damage to Asgard itself. The revelation of his giant nature also provided the gods with justification for their deceptive tactics, as they could claim that his concealment of his true identity had invalidated their original agreement. Thor's killing of the giant builder eliminated both the immediate threat and one of the most skilled craftsmen in any of the 9 worlds. The thunder god's use of Mjolnir to crush the giant's skull created a spectacular demonstration of divine power, while simultaneously destroying irreplaceable knowledge and capabilities that could never be recovered. This violent conclusion to the construction project established a precedent for divine treatment of giant contractors that would influence future negotiations between the races. The gods' decision to retain the partially completed wall, while eliminating its creator, demonstrated their willingness to benefit from giant labour while avoiding payment when circumstances allowed such exploitation. The wall's defensive capabilities, though incomplete, provided significant protection against conventional attacks while serving as a monument to both giant craftsmanship and divine treachery. The structure's existence created ongoing tensions between gods and giants that would persist throughout the remaining cosmic ages. The death of Balder and the conditions surrounding his potential resurrection created the most complex and consequential crisis in the relationship between gods and giants, involving multiple levels of deception, betrayal, and cosmic significance that would ultimately contribute to the events leading to Ragnarok. Balder's status as the most beloved of all gods made his death a catastrophe that threatened the emotional and spiritual foundations of divine civilization, while the circumstances of his killing revealed vulnerabilities in divine society that could be exploited by their enemies. Loki's role in orchestrating Balder's death through his manipulation of the blind god Hoda represented the ultimate betrayal of his adopted divine family and his transformation from problematic ally to active enemy. The shape-changer's identification of mistletoe as the only substance capable of harming Balder required extensive research and magical investigation that demonstrated his sophisticated understanding of the cosmic forces that protected the beloved god. His fashioning of the mistletoe dart and his guidance of Hodra's throw showed premeditation that made his actions unforgivable in divine eyes. The gods' journey to Helheim to negotiate Balder's release demonstrated their desperation to recover their beloved companion, while revealing their willingness to humble themselves before giant authority when circumstances demanded such submission. Hermodr's ride through the dark paths that led to Hel's realm required courage that exceeded normal divine standards, as the journey took him through territories where divine power provided limited protection against the dangers that lurked in the spaces between worlds. Hel's conditions for Balder's release revealed both her understanding of cosmic justice and her recognition of the political implications involved in such a significant decision. Her demand that all things in creation weep for Balder before she would release him from death represented a test that appeared reasonable, while creating practical challenges that would prove nearly impossible to meet. The requirement that every entity in the 9 worlds demonstrate genuine grief for the dead god reflected Hel's awareness of Balder's supposed universal popularity, while providing her with justification for retaining him if the test should fail. The gods' campaign to fulfill Hel's conditions required unprecedented cooperation among all inhabitants of the 9 worlds, as messengers were dispatched to every realm to request that all beings weep for Balder's death. The positive response from gods, giants, humans, animals, plants, stones, and metals demonstrated the genuine affection that Balder had inspired throughout creation, while revealing the extent of divine influence when they chose to exercise it for unified purposes. The success of this massive undertaking seemed to guarantee Balder's return to life and the restoration of a divine happiness. The appearance of the giantess Thok, who refused to weep for Balder, created the single failure that prevented the completion of Hel's test, and ensured that the beloved god would remain in the realm of the dead. Thok's declaration that she'd received no benefit from Balder's life, and would shed no tears for his death, represented either genuine indifference or deliberate sabotage designed to prevent the god's resurrection. Her identity remained mysterious, though many suspected that she was Loki in disguise, continuing his campaign against divine happiness even after his initial success in causing Balder's death. The suspicion that Thok was actually Loki in disguise reflected the gods' growing awareness that the Shape-Changer's hostility toward them had reached levels that would drive him to extraordinary lengths to cause them suffering. The possibility that he had not only killed Balder, but also prevented his resurrection demonstrated malice that exceeded simple mischief or even revenge, suggesting a fundamental corruption of his nature that made reconciliation impossible. This recognition would influence their decision to capture and punish Loki in ways that would guarantee his eternal enmity. The failure of Balder's resurrection attempt created permanent changes in the cosmic order that would persist until Ragnarok itself. The beloved god's continued residence in Helheim deprived the divine community of his moderating influence and emotional support, while providing the realm and son of the dead with a hostage whose value could be exploited during future negotiations. Balder's absence also created a void in divine society that could not be filled by any other individual, weakening their collective morale and reducing their ability to face future challenges with unified determination. The cosmic tensions that had simmered throughout the ages would reach their inevitable culmination when the first bonds began to weaken and snap across the 9 worlds. The breaking of Gleipnir, that deceptively delicate chain forged from impossibilities, marked the beginning of the end times with a sound that reverberated through every realm. Fenrir's massive form, grown to proportions that dwarfed mountains during his long imprisonment, burst free from the restraints that had held him on the island of Lyngvi. His howl of rage and triumph carried across vast distances, awakening ancient powers that had slumbered in the deepest places of the earth, and alerting every giant clan that the time of their ultimate victory had finally arrived. The wolf's liberation sent tremors through the cosmic order that affected magical bindings throughout the 9 worlds. Loki's torment bonds, which had secured him beneath the earth where serpent venom dripped constantly upon his face, began to loosen as the magical forces that maintained them weakened in sympathy with Gleipnir's destruction. The Shape-Changer's wife, Sigyn, who had faithfully held a bowl to catch the venom and spare her husband the worst of his agony, felt the chains that bound his wrists and ankles start to give way. Her tears of relief mixed with terror as she realized that Loki's freedom would unleash upon the world a being whose hatred for the gods had been refined and intensified through ages of unimaginable suffering. The breaking of these primordial bonds created cascading failures throughout the magical infrastructure that maintained the separation between order and chaos. Ancient barriers that had contained the most dangerous giants began to crumble, while protective enchantments that had shielded human settlements from the worst depredations of winter and storm started to fade. The careful balance that had allowed civilization to flourish under divine protection collapsed, as the fundamental assumptions upon which the cosmic order had been built proved inadequate to contain the forces they had sought to control. In the southern realm of Muspelheim, Surtur felt the cosmic tremors and recognized them as the signal he had awaited throughout the ages. The fire giant's massive form, wreathed in flames that burned hotter than the core of any star, rose from his throne of molten rock and grasped the flaming sword that had been forged for this singular purpose. The weapon's blade blazed with such intensity that its light could be seen from the farthest reaches of Jotunheim, serving as a beacon that called all Giantkind to their final assembly. His march from the southern fire realm began with footsteps that left pools of lava in their wake, while his presence caused the very air to shimmer with heat that could melt stone at considerable distances. The fire giants who answered Surtur's call emerged from volcanic caverns and lava tubes throughout Muspelheim, their forms blazing with the concentrated heat of their realm's most extreme environments. These beings of living flame had spent the cosmic ages preparing for this moment, forging weapons from materials that existed only in the hearts of volcanoes, and developing magical techniques that could channel the destructive power of thermal energy on scales that exceeded anything previously witnessed. Their army moved like a tide of molten rock, consuming everything in its path while generating temperatures that transformed the landscape into a hellish wasteland of glass and ash. The advance of Surtur's forces created environmental changes that extended far beyond their immediate path of destruction. The heat they generated affected weather patterns across multiple realms, creating drought conditions that withered crops and dried up water sources that had sustained communities for generations. The smoke and ash from their passage blocked sunlight over vast areas, creating an artificial twilight that heralded the coming darkness. These atmospheric changes served as harbingers of the complete destruction that would follow, warning all inhabitants of the 9 worlds that the final catastrophe was approaching with unstoppable momentum. Simultaneously, the Fimbulwinter began its merciless grip upon the northern realms as the frost giants emerged from their arctic strongholds to claim territories they had long been denied. This was no ordinary winter, but a cosmic phenomenon that brought killing cold to regions that had never experienced such extreme temperatures. The frost giants' mastery of ice-based magic reached its full expression as they worked in coordination to extend winter conditions across vast territories, creating blizzards that lasted for months and generating cold so intense that it could freeze fire itself into crystalline formations. The Hrimthursar who led this Arctic assault possessed abilities that had been enhanced through generations of adaptation to the harshest environments in Jotunheim. Their breath created ice storms that could flash freeze entire forests, while their footsteps left patches of permafrost that would never thaw. The largest among them stood taller than the walls of human cities, their ice-blue skin reflecting the pale light of the dying sun as they strode across landscapes that transformed beneath their feet into frozen wastelands. Their weapons, forged from ice harder than steel, could shatter stone fortifications and freeze the blood in their enemies' veins with a single touch. The psychological impact of the Fimbulwinter proved as devastating as its physical effects, as populations that had never experienced such extreme cold found themselves unprepared for the challenges of survival in an Arctic environment. Food supplies that had been adequate for normal winters proved woefully insufficient for the extended period of cold and darkness that now gripped the land. Communities that had relied on trade and cooperation for their survival found themselves isolated by impassable snowdrifts and ice-covered rivers that could no longer support transportation. The freeing of all Giantkind from their ancient prisons and boundaries created a mobilization of chaotic forces on a scale never before witnessed in the cosmic order. Giants who had been confined to specific territories by divine decree or magical barriers found themselves able to roam freely across the 9 worlds, for the first time since the establishment of the current cosmic arrangement. This liberation allowed giant clans to coordinate their activities in ways that had been impossible during the ages of containment, creating military and magical alliances that combined their individual capabilities into forces that could challenge even the assembled might of the gods. The iron forests of Jarnvidr became staging areas where different giant clans gathered to plan their assault on the ordered world. The metallic trees that had served as neutral meeting grounds during peacetime now hosted war councils where the most powerful giants in all the realms debated strategy and divided territories for conquest. The wolves that had bred in these forests, offspring of Fenrir whose size and ferocity matched their legendary sire, emerged in packs that could overrun entire kingdoms. The howling created a constant soundtrack of menace that could be heard across vast distances, serving as psychological warfare against populations already demoralized by the cosmic upheavals occurring around them. The liberation of sea giants from the deepest ocean trenches brought new dimensions of destruction to the cosmic conflict. These aquatic titans, who had remained largely hidden during the previous ages, possessed the ability to generate tsunamis that could devastate entire coastlines and create whirlpools capable of swallowing the largest vessels. Their emergence from the depths coincided with Jormungandr's movement from his oceanic domain toward the land as the world serpent prepared to fulfill his prophesied role in the final destruction. The combined activities of these marine forces created oceanic chaos that made sea travel impossible while threatening coastal settlements with constant inundation. Mountain giants who had been confined to specific peaks and ranges found themselves able to abandon their traditional territories and join the growing army of chaos that was assembling across the Nine Worlds. These earth-shaking titans possessed the ability to cause avalanches and rock slides that could bury entire valleys, while their movements generated earthquakes that toppled the strongest fortifications. Their knowledge of underground passages and cave systems allowed them to move their forces through routes that bypassed conventional defences, appearing suddenly in locations where their presence had not been anticipated. The storm giants who controlled weather patterns throughout the Nine Worlds coordinated their efforts to create atmospheric conditions that favoured the forces of chaos while hindering divine and human defensive efforts. Hurricanes and tornadoes appeared with unnatural frequency, following paths that seemed designed to maximise destruction of civilised settlements while avoiding areas where giant forces were concentrating. Lightning strikes occurred with precision that suggested conscious direction, targeting divine temples and human fortifications, while leaving giant encampments untouched by the electrical violence that raged around them. The prophetic vision of the Volva, which had foretold these events throughout the cosmic ages, now revealed its terrible accuracy as each predicted catastrophe manifested with devastating precision. The ancient seeress had described the breaking of bonds, the freeing of monsters, and the assembly of chaotic forces with a detail that proved her access to cosmic knowledge that transcended normal temporal limitations. Her prophecy of the world's destruction served not as warning that might be heeded, but as inevitable destiny that would unfold regardless of any attempts at prevention or mitigation. The cosmic fire that Surtur carried in his flaming sword represented the ultimate expression of destructive force, capable of consuming not merely physical matter, but the very concepts and ideas that gave structure to reality. This was not ordinary flame that could be extinguished by water or smothered by earth, but cosmic fire that fed upon existence itself. The sword's blade had been forged from materials that existed at the intersection of multiple realities, drawing its power from sources that transcended the normal limitations of elemental magic. When Surtur raised this weapon above his head, its light could be seen from every realm in the cosmic tree, serving as the final signal for the assault that would destroy the ordered world. The march of the combined giant armies toward the final battlefield created migrations of chaotic force that altered the fundamental nature of the territories they crossed. The very ground beneath their feet began to revert to the primordial state that had existed before the gods imposed their ordered structure upon the cosmos. Plants and animals that had been shaped by divine influence started to transform back into the wild, unpredictable forms that had characterized the earliest ages of creation. The boundaries between different types of terrain began to blur as the presence of so much concentrated chaos disrupted the magical forces that maintained geographical distinctions. The approach of these vast armies created refugee movements as populations fled before the advancing tide of destruction. Humans who had lived their entire lives under divine protection found themselves abandoned to face threats that exceeded their ability to comprehend or resist. Some sought shelter in the deepest caves or the most remote wilderness areas, hoping to survive the cosmic catastrophe through concealment and isolation. Others gathered in the remaining divine strongholds, placing their faith in the gods' ability to protect them despite the overwhelming odds that now arrayed against the forces of order. The gods' recognition that their defensive preparations had proved inadequate forced them to confront the reality that the cosmic conflict had entered its final phase. Their attempts to rally their remaining allies and consolidate their forces revealed the extent to which the balance of power had shifted in favour of the chaotic forces they had spent ages trying to control. The loss of Balder, whose wisdom and moderating influence might have provided crucial leadership during this crisis, left them without the unified command structure necessary for coordinating an effective defence against the multiple threats they now faced simultaneously. The convergence of all these destructive forces at the field of Vigrid created the conditions for the final battle that would determine the fate of the cosmic order. This vast plain, which had been chosen by fate itself as the site of the ultimate confrontation, stretched beyond the horizon in all directions, providing space for armies whose size exceeded anything that had been assembled during the previous ages. The ground itself seemed to anticipate the violence that would soon transform it into a charnel field, as the grass withered and the soil took on the dark colour of dried blood. Odin's final gathering of the Einherjar, the chosen slain who had been recruited from battlefields throughout the cosmic ages, represented the gods' last attempt to match the numerical superiority of their giant enemies. These elite warriors had been selected for their courage and skill in combat, then trained in Valhalla's halls to fight as a coordinated force against the enemies of order. However, even their legendary abilities and perfect coordination would prove insufficient against opponents whose power drew directly from the primordial chaos that had existed before creation itself. The world serpent's emergence from the ocean to join the final battle brought with it the poisonous breath that would contaminate the atmosphere and make the very air lethal to most forms of life. Jormungandr's massive coils, which had grown to encircle the entire world during his oceanic residence, now rose above the surface like living mountains, whose movement created tidal waves that reached far inland. His venom, concentrated through ages of development in the deepest ocean trenches, possessed toxicity that could kill gods as easily as mortals, creating clouds of poisonous vapour that preceded his advance across the battlefield. Fenrir's arrival at Vigrid fulfilled the prophecies that had identified him as Odin's destroyer, as the wolf's size had increased during his imprisonment to proportions that allowed him to swallow the sun itself. His jaws, which could crush mountains between his teeth, gaped wide enough to encompass entire armies, while his howl created sound waves that shattered stone and drove lesser beings mad with terror. The hatred that had sustained him through ages of captivity now reached its full expression as he faced the god who had ordered his binding and prepared to exact the vengeance that had motivated his every breath during the long years of his imprisonment. The battle itself transcended normal concepts of warfare, as cosmic forces clashed with violence that threatened to tear apart the fabric of reality. Thor's final confrontation with Jormungandr demonstrated the mutual destruction that characterized many of the individual combats, as the thunder god's hammer delivered the killing blow that ended the world serpent's existence even as the creature's dying breath filled Thor's lungs with venom that would prove fatal within moments. The simultaneous deaths of these two titans created a vacuum in the cosmic balance that allowed other forces to achieve victories that might otherwise have been impossible. Odin's prophesied death in Fenrir's jaws marked the end of the divine leadership that had guided the forces of order throughout the cosmic ages. The All-Father's final moments, as he was swallowed whole by the giant wolf whose binding he had ordered, represented not merely the death of an individual, but the collapse of the entire system of cosmic governance that had maintained the separation between order and chaos. His ravens, Hugin and Munin, who had served as his eyes and ears throughout the 9 worlds, fell silent as their master's death severed their connection to the sources of information that had made divine rule possible. Surtur's raising of his flaming sword above the battlefield created the moment that the Volva had foreseen as the ultimate climax of cosmic destruction. The fire giant's weapon, blazing with heat that exceeded the core temperature of stars, descended toward the roots of Yggdrasil itself, with force that would consume not merely the physical structure of the world tree, but the magical principles that had allowed it to connect and support the 9 worlds. The sword's impact sent waves of cosmic fire racing along every branch and root, consuming the entire structure of reality in flames that burned away the distinctions between different realms and different types of existence. The consumption of Yggdrasil by Surtur's cosmic fire marked the end of the ordered world and the return of existence to the primordial state that had characterized the void before creation. The 9 worlds collapsed back into the undifferentiated chaos from which they had originally emerged, as the magical forces that had maintained their individual characteristics and separate identities were consumed by flames that recognized no boundaries or limitations. The carefully constructed cosmos that the gods had built from Ymir's body dissolved back into the raw potential that had existed in Ginnungagap before the first stirrings of consciousness had begun the cycle of creation and destruction. Yet the Volva's vision extended beyond this ultimate destruction to encompass the renewal that would follow the cosmic fire's consumption of the old order. From the ashes of the burned world, new land would emerge from the ocean, green and fertile in ways that surpassed the beauty of the previous creation. The surviving gods, Baldur and Höder, released from Hel's realm, Vidar and Vali, who had escaped the general destruction, and Thor's sons, Modi and Magni, who inherited their father's hammer and strength, would gather in the renewed world to establish a new cosmic order that incorporated the lessons learned from the previous cycle's failures. The handful of humans who survived the cosmic catastrophe by hiding in Yggdrasil's trunk would emerge to repopulate the renewed world, carrying with them the memories and knowledge of the previous age while adapting to the new conditions that characterized the post-Ragnarok reality. These survivors would establish civilizations that reflected both continuity with the past and adaptation to the changed cosmic circumstances, creating cultures that honored the achievements of the previous age while avoiding the mistakes that had led to its destruction. The giants' final victory over the ordered world thus served not as an ending, but as a transformation that cleared the way for a new beginning. Their success in destroying the cosmic arrangements that had constrained their chaotic nature for so many ages demonstrated that the fundamental forces of change and unpredictability could never be permanently suppressed by any system of order, no matter how sophisticated or well defended. The cosmic cycle that concluded with their triumph would begin anew with their descendants and the surviving gods learning to coexist in ways that acknowledge the necessity of both order and chaos for the continued vitality of existence itself. The prophetic vision that had guided understanding of these events throughout the cosmic ages revealed its ultimate wisdom in showing that destruction and renewal formed parts of a single, eternal process that transcended the limited perspectives of individual races or civilizations. The giants' victory represented not the triumph of evil over good, but the necessary clearing away of accumulated rigidities that had prevented the cosmic order from adapting to changing circumstances. Their chaotic nature, which had seemed so threatening to the established order, proved to be the catalyst that enabled the emergence of new forms of existence that combined the best aspects of both order and chaos in sustainable harmony. Thus ended the age of the first gods and the primordial giants, their cosmic conflict resolved through mutual destruction that opened the way for their successors to build upon the foundations they had laid, while avoiding the fatal contradictions that had doomed their predecessors. The giants' final victory achieved not the destruction of all existence, but its transformation into forms that could accommodate both the stability necessary for civilization and the change essential for continued growth and development. In this way, the ancient enemies became partners in the eternal dance of creation and destruction that would continue throughout all future cosmic cycles. Their opposition transformed into the dynamic tension that drives the ongoing evolution of existence itself.